Chapter 449. Half an hour later, a fiery red figure flashed and shot out of the door. After landing on the ground, he took a few more steps forward. His steps were messy and his aura was chaotic. You failed. The black-robed swordsman saw that the situation was similar to when he came out, so he immediately laughed with schadenfreude. It was a typical example of not wanting others to succeed even if he could not do it himself. The core disciple of the real flame sword sect had a gloomy expression. He glanced at the core disciple of the Moro sword sect with hatred, then glanced at Chu Mu before walking forward without saying anything. After walking for a while, his figure faded and disappeared. He had already left the palace. The black-robed swordsman chuckled, not minding it at all. The failure of the core disciple of the real flame sword sect had made him feel a lot better, so he did not intend to leave immediately. He planned to see Chu Mu fail so that he could be happier. "Young man, it is your turn," the hunchbacked elder said lightly. "Yeah." Chu Mu nodded and let out a soft breath. His mental state had reached an unprecedented peak. He took a step forward and appeared at the door like a dream, then flashed inside. Chu Mu felt like he had just passed through water. When he landed on the ground, he looked around. It was a very strange place, as if he was in the clouds. Looking around, it was empty except for white clouds floating around. There was also a white cloud under his feet, which was a few meters wide and a few meters long. This feeling of walking in the clouds gave Chu Mu a very novel experience. The sky was vast and the ground was boundless. The clouds were everywhere, and there was a feeling of nowhere to land. This kind of environment could easily make a swordsman lose his mind. Chu Mu was startled when he first saw it, but he immediately calmed himself down. At the same time, a white cloud flew over from the distance at a very fast speed, as if it had been blown by a gust of wind. It did not seem strange at all, but when it passed by the one Chu Mu was in, a figure shot out at a speed faster than the speed of sound, thrusting out a sword. The sword light changed like a rolling white cloud, full of mysteries and mysteries. It was also too sudden, making it impossible to dodge. 1/100th of a second later, Chu Mu came to his senses. He didn't dodge. He unsheathed the monster-slaying sword and slashed horizontally, activating the stone quake wave sword. Pung! Under Chu Mu's counterattack, the attacking figure paused for a moment before exploding into clouds and mist that were blown away by the wind. Only the white clouds remained. Normal Chi-High warriors would not be able to defend against this sword attack. Chu Mu said to himself as he held the monster beheading sword in his hand. Suddenly, he felt his vision blur, and a strong wind whistled past his ears. The scenery in front of him seemed to be rushing up at a terrifying speed, but in fact, it was his body that was rapidly falling. The sudden change startled Chu Mu, but he quickly regained his composure. He maintained a steady posture and focused his attention on the movements in all directions. The falling speed was extremely fast. Countless streams of air rushed up in front of his eyes. After an unknown amount of time, Chu Mu felt his feet shake, as if he had stepped on something. He glanced around and realized that he was standing on top of a lake. Because of his feet, there were layers of ripples spreading out. The lake was very wide and he couldn't see the end of it. However, it was very quiet and lifeless. It seemed that this was only a half-abyssal realm warrior, so it didn't have the abilities of a real abyssal realm warrior. The ripples spread out for more than 10 meters before disappearing. When Chu Mu looked away, he heard a very soft sound of water. Right after that, 2 almost undetectable sounds of wind breaking came from the left and right. A figure appeared from each side of the lake. It was as if they were formed by the lake water. They both attacked with their swords. One of them stabbed forward, one of them chopped down. One of them was like a drop of water piercing through a rock, and the other was like a river breaking. The 2 sword attacks were completely different. They both contained 90% of the water mentality and were extremely powerful. The 2 attacked from the left and right, creating a deadly situation. Facing the attacks of the two figures, Chu Mu only threw out two sword attacks. Because the sword's speed was too fast, it was as if he was attacking with two hands at the same time. Pucci. Under the rock-shaking wave sword, the sword attacks of the two figures were shattered. Even their figures were shattered, turning into countless water droplets that dripped onto the lake surface, splashing out countless more ripples. The power of these two water people was similar to the cloud people from before. However, when the two of them worked together, they were even more powerful. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu felt the lake water shake violently. The world changed, and in the blink of an eye, he was standing in the middle of a forest. There were hundreds of meters tall trees everywhere. Countless vines wrapped around the trees, and there was a lot of grass on the ground. When the wind blew, the grass swayed and the leaves rustled. This forest was very wide and should be full of life. However, Chu Mu couldn't feel any of it. It was as if all of this was just an illusion. Cloud element, water element, and now wood element. Will there be 3 sword warriors using the wood mentality? Chu Mu guessed secretly. As expected, a figure appeared from each of the 3 trees. It was as if they had merged with the trees. They attacked Chu Mu at the same time. 90% wood mentality and different sword attack. One attack was like a huge tree falling down, one was like a winding vine, and the last one was like a falling leaf. The 3 sword attacks came from 3 different angles, forming a triangle. The 3 sword attacks complemented each other, and their power was multiplied. Chu Mu still didn't move. The monster-slaying sword attacked from 3 different directions in an instant. It was still the rock-shaking wave sword. Deshang used the peak of the rock-shaking power. He had integrated 1% of his sword aura into his 70% ripping mentality. Its power was unbelievably powerful. With 1 sword attack, he killed his opponent instantly. In the blink of an eye, the forest changed again. Desolation descended, turning into a land of rock. This time, 4 figures appeared from the rock. They used earth element sword arts and 90% earth mentality. The power of the 4 combined was even more powerful. However, they were still not Chu Mu's opponent. Under the rock-shaking power sword, he easily defeated the 4 figures again. From the moment he entered this half-ethereal realm, it was the cloud. Then it was the lake. Then it was the forest. Then it was the land of rocks. Finally, it was a strange place with raging flames. Chu Mu stood on a rock in the middle of the raging flames. There were raging flames in all directions, but Chu Mu couldn't feel any heat. This was the flaw of the half-ethereal realm. It was not real enough. Even so, the 5 fiery red silhouettes that came out of the raging flames each performed a different fire element sword move and 90% fire mentality. They were extremely powerful, and each of their sword moves were able to complement each other to bring out even more power. This time, Chu Mu didn't kill his opponent immediately. Instead, he used his body movement to move around the huge rock in a small area, dodging the sword attacks of the 5 figures. When the sword attacks missed, they immediately changed their moves. The speed was extremely fast. It was completely the work of a brilliant swordsman. After 3 moves, Chu Mu killed all 5 figures with his sword. He realized that the sword attacks of these figures were profound and profound. Previously, he killed them with 1 move. Now, he felt that he should take a look and experience it. It might be helpful to him. After the fire, there was metal. There were countless broken swords buried in the ruins. It was a bit like the cultivation holy ground of the great Kuan sword mansion, Metal Sword Tomb. Here, 6 broken swords transformed into 6 golden figures. They used metal element sword attacks and 90% metal mentality. They were extremely sharp as they cut through the air and slashed towards Chu Mu. The 6 sword attacks each had their own unique characteristic. The area here was wider. Chu Mu used the flying swan illusory steps to move around, purely dodging the attacks of the 6 golden figures. Every sword attack was extremely sharp as it tore through the air. The sharpness was frightening. Chu Mu realized that not only were the sword attacks of these figures powerful, but they were also very quiet. Before they attacked, there were no signs. They only exploded with absolute power when they were about to hit their target. As such, this sword attack was rather confusing. It could maximize the power of the attack. At the same time, it could save on energy consumption. Chu Mu obtained comprehension, and as he dodged, he comprehended. Afterwards, he attacked with his sword. When the rock-shaking wave sword was used, its momentum was smaller than before, and its power was more restrained. It only exploded when it hit the target. One sword attack, instant kill. Next, after the wind and clouds changed, Chu Mu appeared in a world of ice and snow. 7 ice men appeared and used ice element sword attacks and 90% ice mentality. After the ice, there was wind. It was a green wind. Endless wind blew from all directions. Chu Mu stood in the wind as if he had left the world behind. In the wind that kept blowing, 8 green figures condensed. They held green swords and used wind element sword attacks and 90% wind mentality. Chu Mu used the flying swan illusory steps to dodge, while observing the opponent's sword attacks and reactions. This was a rare experience. The 8 green figures had already brought great pressure to Chu Mu. Under this pressure, the flying swan illusory steps, which had not made any progress for a long time, began to improve slightly. He also had to use his sword to fight back to avoid being killed. There was only motivation when there was pressure. This sentence was indeed true. Under this kind of battle, Chu Mu spent a lot of time before he used both the stone-shaking wave sword and the sky-splitting sword to defeat the 8 green figures one by one. Then, the ground changed again. The ground sank, and only the ground where Chu Mu stood did not move. Finally, it formed a 100-meter-tall mountain peak. This mountain peak was only a dozen meters wide, standing between heaven and earth like a pillar. The endless green wind disappeared. Dark clouds spread from the distance and covered the sky in the blink of an eye. It was gloomy and oppressive. Then, with a loud crack, a bolt of lightning swam in the dark clouds like a dragon. Then, a purple light appeared and thunder fell from the sky. The pressure was heavy and boundless. The wind just now had almost injured Chu Mu. This thunder would be even more difficult to deal with. Sure enough, the thunder fell from the sky and turned the world into a sea of thunder. 9 purple figures appeared in it and turned into thunder and lightning, rushing toward Chu Mu at an extremely fast speed. Sword out, kill. Chu Mu could only dodge and fight back within the range of a dozen meters. The 9 purple figures were extremely fast. The pressure they brought to Chu Mu was even greater than the 8 green figures. In the end, Chu Mu defeated the 9 purple figures at the price of his white robe being cut into strips. Countless thunder and lightning dispersed, and the dark clouds retreated. Chu Mu stood on the mountain peak and looked at the clear sky. Suddenly, he was enlightened. Using his sword as a pen, he wrote 4 words in the void in front of him. A figure was shot out from the door and landed steadily. His eyes were shining, but his breath was a little chaotic. Hee, it's good that you failed. The black-robed swordsman saw this and laughed subconsciously. He was gloating. At the same time, the row after the 80th name on the sword hero's heavenly steel flashed with a light. It was as if words were being carved. When the light disappeared, a name appeared. Chu Mu Zhentian. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 450. The gloating smile on the face of the core disciple of the Moro sword sect froze. His eyes bulged as his countenance paled. His mouth was agape, and he almost bit his own tongue. He looked exactly like a toad as he stared at the heavenly sword steel with disbelief written all over his face. Young man, you have truly exceeded the expectations of this old man. The hunchbacked old man also glanced at the heavenly sword steel as shock and astonishment flashed in his eyes. He had already judged that Chu Mu wouldn't be able to pass the challenge this time around. This confidence originated from his cultivation base and experience, as well as his pair of eyes that had never made a mistake before. But this time around, he had actually made a mistake, a real mistake. However, the hunchbacked old man wasn't angered because of his wrong judgment. On the contrary, he was extremely happy. Every new sword hero was a type of wealth to the world of swordsmen. As the manager of the Eastern Sage Hall, he was extremely happy to see this. His title is Gentian, Sword Hero. The hunchbacked old man mumbled in a low voice. After which, he stared at Chu Mu as his eyes gleamed with sharpness. Young man, what's the meaning behind this title? It's a type of sustenance. Chu Mu replied. The hunchbacked old man and Chu Mu didn't even glance at the black-robed swordsman. After the black-robed swordsman recovered from his shock, he glanced at Chu Mu with fear in his eyes before turning and leaving. He no longer dared to have any hostility towards Chu Mu. The level of strength determined the level of strength. The current him had failed the challenge. Although he was extremely unwilling, he knew that he wasn't a match for a sword hero. Not only that, Chu Mu was only 20 years old. A 20-year-old sword hero was even more outstanding compared to the number 1 sword hero, Mu Longqing. His future achievements would definitely surpass Mu Longqing. Offending such a person was no different from digging one's own grave. The departure of the black-robed swordsman was ignored by the hunchbacked old man and Chu Mu. Chu Mu stared at the last name on the heavenly sword steel as his heart trembled with excitement. Sword hero, sword hero, sword hero. The hunchbacked old man's fingers moved rapidly as if he was playing a piano. Sword chi shot out from his fingers one after another, condensing in the air before him. They crisscrossed and formed a peculiar sword-shaped mark. Go! The old man bellowed, and the turbidity in his eyes disappeared once again. The sword-shaped imprint turned into a stream of light and shot towards the heavenly sword steel. It happened to be where Chu Mu's name was. The sword-shaped imprint disappeared into it in the blink of an eye, and the words Chu Mu and Zhen Tian immediately blossomed with light. Drawl, the hunchbacked old man released an incomparably strong aura from his body. His hands moved again, and immediately, the heavenly sword steel shone brightly. In the blink of an eye, it shrunk rapidly, and finally condensed on the words Chu Mu and Zhen Tian. In the next breath, a ball of light left the sword hero's heavenly steel and slowly flew out, landing in the hunchbacked old man's hand. The hunchbacked old man's face was slightly pale, and the light in his eyes seemed to be extinguished, returning to its turbidity. A black sword token appeared in his hand, and it was like a miniature version of the heavenly sword steel. The moment the black sword token appeared, the other 80 sword heroes' tokens of the Great Kuan dynasty released a wave of light. Oh, after 2 years, another person has successfully challenged the sword hero title. I didn't expect that after one left, another one would come in. It just so happens that there are 81 people. Haha, good. It's a person called Chu Mu, and his title is Gentian. Sword Hero Gentian. This title is really domineering. In various parts of the Great Kuan dynasty, and even outside of the Great Kuan dynasty, the 80 sword heroes had different reactions when they found out that Chu Mu had become the sword hero Gentian. Chu Mu, this is your sword hero's token. It's the symbol of your identity. The hunchbacked old man handed the black sword token to Chu Mu. May I ask how I should address Senior? When Chu Mu received the sword hero's token, he felt refreshed. When he looked at the black sword token, he couldn't determine its material. It was very light like a leaf, but it also had a texture. This contradictory feeling left a deep impression on Chu Mu. You can just call me Elder Tua. The hunchbacked old man slowly said. Chu Mu, first of all, this old man would like to congratulate you on becoming the 81st sword hero of the Great Kuan dynasty. I noticed that after you succeeded in the challenge, you didn't suffer any injuries. It can be seen that your strength is slightly superior to the average sword hero. You are still young, not even 20 years old. Your future is limitless, and it is also very possible for you to obtain the title of Sword Saint. However, you must not be complacent because of this. You must know that cultivation is like sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall behind. This junior will remember this in his heart. I don't dare to slack off in the slightest. Chu Mu saluted with his sword. Everyone understood this logic, but not everyone could do it. The reason why Elder Tuo said this to Chu Mu was because of Chu Mu's outstanding talent. He hoped that Chu Mu would be able to move forward courageously and achieve greater achievements. With such a senior teaching him, Chu Mu naturally wouldn't not appreciate it. Good. Elder Tuo chuckled and nodded. Now that you have become a sword hero, it is not as simple as a title. From now on, you can stay in the King City for as long as you want. Even the great Koan royal clan won't be able to chase you away for no reason. This is just the simplest benefit. In addition, you can also stay in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace. My Eastern Sage Sub-Palace has quite a number of books. Although the number can't be compared to the 4 great sword sects, the Great Koan Sword Mansion, and the Royal Clan, they are all rare books. Lastly, you can also enter the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace's Sword Comprehension Hall to cultivate. This Sword Comprehension Hall can increase your perception to a certain extent. Furthermore, there are many sword scars left behind by seniors. Chu Mu nodded his head. Right now, you have 2 choices. The first choice is to leave the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace and only come back here to cultivate after you have made your decision. Because you only have one chance. Elder Tuo spoke neither hurriedly nor slowly, exuding a majestic aura as he continued. The second choice is to stay in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace and cultivate until you wish to leave. I choose the second choice. Chu Mu didn't even need to think before he replied. After he had a deeper understanding of the Sword Hero Challenge and the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace, he had already made his decision. Once he succeeded in the challenge and obtained the title of Sword Hero, other than the title, he would be able to cultivate in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace. There was only one chance, regardless of the length of time. In other words, you could cultivate here for a month, a year, 10 years, or even 100 years. The prerequisite was that you had to be able to stay here. After all, within the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace, there was only Elder Tuo. Once you chose to cultivate here, you wouldn't be able to see Elder Tuo. From the start to the end, you would be alone. Although it was said that sword cultivators often had to be alone when they cultivated, if they stayed in one place for too long, many people wouldn't be able to endure it and would go crazy because of the loneliness. Since you've already made your decision, I won't persuade you anymore. Elder Tuo spoke. I'll give you some time to prepare your own food. I'm already prepared. Chu Mu replied. Oh, since that's the case, follow me then. Elder Tuo spoke as he turned and walked forward. Chu Mu followed closely behind. It's not so easy to cultivate in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace. If you feel that you can't endure it any longer, you have to leave immediately. If not, you might leave behind hidden dangers which would be detrimental to your future cultivation. Elder Tuo slowly walked forward as he explained. Chu Mu was slightly stunned. Although he knew that after obtaining the title of Sword Hero, he would have a chance to cultivate in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace. However, he didn't know what the process was like. Now that he heard Elder Tuo's words, it didn't seem to be so easy. No matter what, this chance to cultivate in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace is meant for sword heroes. Since that's the case, there's no danger to my life. At the very most, it would only bring me some pressure. Chu Mu silently mused. If I can't endure this pressure, how can I even talk about the Tao of the sword? Elder Tuo halted after walking for tens of meters. Facing an empty wall in the Great Hall, he once again shot out streams of sword chi. The sword chi was akin to a tempest, blasting into the empty wall. The wall was like a sponge, absorbing the sword chi into it. After Elder Tuo consecutively blasted out 3 waves of sword chi, the empty wall finally lit up with a faint glow. Then, without a sound, the wall under the faint light disappeared, as if it had been corroded. "That's the door." Elder Tuo pointed to the vanishing wall as he spoke. Chu Mu stared at it, only to see a stretch of dim light. There was basically no way for him to see what was inside. It was like a black hole that wanted to devour everything. "Since you've chosen to use this chance to cultivate here, you can enter now." Elder Tu turned to look at Chu Mu and said, "Remember, if you can't endure it and want to leave, you only need to inject your sword chi into the sword hero token. It can only be used in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace." "Thank you, Elder Tu." Chu Mu saluted with his sword and took a step forward. His body flashed as he rushed towards the dim light door. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into it, as if he was swallowed by an ancient giant beast. Elder Tuo stared at Chu Mu, who had entered the dim light door. After a long time, he finally let out a sigh. 20 years old, initial chi high stage, yet able to successfully challenge the sword hero title. This is completely out of my expectations. After sighing, Elder Tuo muttered to himself, after successfully challenging the title, he wasn't injured at all. His strength is extraordinary. It seems that his sword force is very likely to have reached the peak of perfection, or one of his concepts has reached 100%. No matter which one it is, to be able to achieve this at the age of 20, he can be said to be the only one in the great Kuan dynasty in 1,000 years. As he spoke, Elder Tuo's murky eyes were filled with anticipation. Such a genius, as long as he doesn't die prematurely, he will definitely become a revered sword. The probability of him becoming a sword of Gojoseon is extremely high. Even the sword saint might have a slight chance. However, it's only a slight chance. Sword saint. Sword saint. I have been here for 100 years, but I still haven't seen a trace of its profundity. The faint sigh spread throughout the entire palace. Within this sigh, there was a hint of unwillingness and loneliness. So this Elder Tuo was actually a sword of Gojoseon. Using a sword of Gojoseon to oversee the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace of the Great Kuan Dynasty, this kind of wealth was shocking. In the 100 years that I've been in charge of the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace, among all the sword heroes that entered the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace, the one who lasted the longest was Mu Longqing. 1 year. I wonder how long this Chu Mu can last? Half a year? Or 1 year? As the sigh died down, the light in the palace dimmed. Elder Tuo's figure also seemed to have disappeared. Everything returned to silence. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 451. Chu Mu did not know that old Tuo had such a high opinion of him. He had already entered the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace's book collection hall. The book collection hall was not very big. It was about 100 square meters, but it was 20 meters tall. Other than the entrance, there were bookshelves on all 4 sides. The bookshelves were one with the walls. There were many books on the bookshelves. They were packed together like a small library. Perhaps compared to the 4 great sword sects Great Kuan Sword Mansion and Great Kuan Royal Family's book collection, Eastern Saint Sub-Palace's book collection was indeed lacking. However, after Chu Mu swept his eyes over the book collection, he roughly understood what old Tuo was saying. Of the books collected here, there wasn't a single one that was useless. Each one had an unimaginable value. Chu Mu wanted to have a deeper understanding of the ancient sword continent. This place was just the beginning. Although after reaching the Chi High realm, a sword artist's need for food had decreased, they still had to maintain the frequency of eating once every 2 days. Otherwise, it would be detrimental to the body. It was said that after reaching the origin realm, one would be able to go without eating for a long time without any effect. Chu Mu had an extreme-grade spatial bracelet and 2 upper-grade spatial bracelet. In one of the upper-grade spatial bracelets, Chu Mu had stored a large amount of food and wine in preparation for his closed-door training. This time, he was prepared for a long period of closed-door training. His original plan was to obtain the Sword Hero title and return to the Sword Palace before going into closed-door training. But now, if he went into closed-door training in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace, he would be able to read a large amount of books and enter the Sword Comprehension Palace. These benefits were not available in the Sword Palace. Chu Mu had no reason to reject. Next, Chu Mu began to live a regular life. First, he visited the Book Collection Hall and the Sword Comprehension Palace. Then, he stayed in a small sub-palace beside the two palaces. Then, he began to adjust his condition. Once he was in peak condition, he dispersed the Heaven Origin Sword Chi in his body. Dispersing the Heaven Origin Sword Chi that had reached the initial Chi High Realm was an extremely painful process. It was as if countless sharp knives were cutting and twisting in his meridians. Luckily, Chu Mu had already reached the first level of the Heavenly Desolate Sword Body, which was why he was able to withstand the pain. After spending 2 hours, Chu Mu finally managed to disperse the Heaven Origin Sword Chi. It was hard to imagine how he would have been able to endure such pain if he had not cultivated the Heavenly Desolation Sword Body and increased the strength of his meridians by over 10 times. It was no wonder that the higher the cultivation level of a swordsman, the more unwilling they were to switch to a sword chi art. Unless the sword chi art they were switching to was much more powerful than the sword chi art they were currently cultivating, just the pain alone was enough to cause one's expression to change drastically. Some might even be unable to withstand it and faint. Once he fainted while dispersing the sword chi would go out of control. At that time, even if he did not die, his meridians would be destroyed. Even his dantian would not be spared, turning him into a cripple. The dangers involved were not something that could be explained in a few words. After dispersing the Heaven Origin Sword Chi, Chu Mu's face was pale. His eyes were filled with fatigue, but his pupils were abnormally bright. Because dispersing the Heaven Origin Sword Chi was the first step to cultivating the Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi. He had completed it. His dantian was empty. There was not a single trace of Heaven Origin Sword Chi. The second step was to condense a strand of Heaven Origin Sword Chi according to the Chi Cultivation chapter of the Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi. The first step was usually the most difficult. Chu Mu did not plan to start now. Dispersing the Heaven Origin Sword Chi made him feel very tired. Therefore, Chu Mu lay down and prepared to sleep first. Next, Chu Mu took out 2 hours every day to cultivate the Chi Cultivation chapter of the Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi. He also held a low-grade Heavenly Desolate stone in each of his hands. There was a sentence in the Heavenly Desolate Sword Manual. The Heavenly Desolate Stone could assist in the cultivation of the Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi, just like how Spirit Stones could assist in the cultivation of Sword Chi. Other than cultivating the Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi, he used 4 hours to cultivate basic swordsmanship and the foundation of a swordsman, 4 hours to read books in the library to increase his knowledge, 8 hours to comprehend in the Sword Comprehension Hall, and the last 4 hours to rest. 3 days later, Chu Mu once again condensed a strand of Heaven Origin Sword Chi in his dantian. This strand of Heaven Origin Sword Chi was yellowish-brown, like the color of the vast barren land. It emitted an ancient aura that filled Chu Mu's dantian. Although this strand of Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi was small, Chu Mu could feel that it was far more condensed than the Heavenly Origin Sword Chi. With a thought, the strand of Heavenly Desolate Sword Chi appeared at Chu Mu's fingertips in an instant. It was as agile as a fish. Its purity is far greater than the Heavenly Origin Sword Chi. Its control is also far greater than the Heavenly Origin Sword Chi. Its power is not something that the Heavenly Origin Sword Chi can compare with. It is indeed a top-grade Earth-level Sword Chi art. Chu Mu thought to himself, his face full of joy. Since the first strand of heavenly desolate sword chi had been successfully condensed, the next step was to continuously condense more strands of heavenly desolate sword chi to fill up his dantian until he regained the initial chi high level of sword chi. Because the heavenly desolate sword chi was too pure, the speed of condensing the heavenly desolate sword chi was slower than the heavenly origin sword chi. This required more time for Chu Mu. Fortunately, he decided to stay here for a long period of time to cultivate. Very quickly, a month had passed. Chu Mu began to understand what old hunchback meant when he said he could not withstand it. He could clearly feel that the longer he stayed here, the greater the pressure on his mind. It was as if there was a pressure that was increasing bit by bit. After a month, it had already increased by 2 times. If it was a normal sword master, this kind of pressure on the mind would cause them to feel uncomfortable and have no choice but to leave. But for Chu Mu, this kind of pressure could only be felt by him, but it could not cause any pressure. However, the pressure was increasing every day. Perhaps one day, it would increase to a level that Chu Mu could not withstand. The Sword Comprehension Hall was a side hall with a small door. It was also 20 meters tall and had 8 walls. On each wall, there were many sword marks that crisscrossed. Some of these sword marks were long, some were short, some were thick, some were thin, some were high, some were low, and they did not seem to be made by the same person. This was because these sword marks all had different auras. Different swordsmen cultivated different cultivation techniques and sword techniques, used different swords, and so on. Any slight difference would cause the sword marks to be different. This could not be seen from the outside. Only by sensing the aura within would one be able to understand. After a month of comprehension, Chu Mu already knew that a portion of the sword marks in the Sword Comprehension Hall were left behind by senior experts. There were probably experts at the level of the Sword of Gojoseon, as well as experts at the level of Sword Venerable. Most of them were left behind by sword masters. They should have been left behind by sword masters who had entered this place to cultivate. As he planned to stay here for a long period of time to cultivate, Chu Mu began to comprehend the sword marks of the sword master level, which had the weakest aura. He vaguely saw a figure practicing the sword. This experience had happened before on the 8th floor of the Earth Wasteland building. At that time, Chu Mu had saved half a year of effort and pushed his sword force to the peak of perfection. However, after a month here, Chu Mu's sword force had not made any progress. He knew that after reaching the peak of perfection in sword force, it was extremely difficult to make any progress. It was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more difficult than before. Countless swordsmen were stuck at the peak of perfection in sword force, unable to break through for the rest of their lives. They could not even make any progress. In the end, they were only left with regret. Therefore, Chu Mu was not in a hurry. Through the books in the library, he knew that the realm above the peak of perfection in sword force was sword intent. However, before comprehending sword intent, there was still one more step to take, and that was the peak of sword force. Only by reaching the peak of sword force would one have the opportunity to comprehend sword intent. This was the iron law of sword Tao. Cultivating and comprehending every day, even though there was no progress in sword force, Chu Mu's dantian had more and more heavenly wasteland sword chi. His cultivation had also broken through from the first stage of the sword chi realm to the chi transformation realm and was still improving. The heavenly wasteland stones were consumed piece by piece. Fortunately, he had obtained tens of thousands of heavenly wasteland stones, which was enough for his current consumption. As he comprehended in the Sword Comprehension Hall, he saw more sword scars left behind by sword heroes. He also read a large number of books in the library, which broadened his horizons. Many things that he did not understand in the past were enlightened, and many secrets were also understood. For example, the origin of the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace, the origin of the Eastern Sage City, and so on. It turned out that there was a huge power in the central sword domain that transcended worldly affairs. This power was called the Hundred Saints Alliance. The so-called Hundred Saints Alliance, as the name implied, was an alliance formed by 100 sword saints. As for why this alliance was formed by 100 sword saints, Chu Mu had only seen a few records. It seemed to be a deeper level of secret. Perhaps he would only have the opportunity to understand it after he entered the central sword domain. Sword Saint was the fourth title in Sword Dao. It was above the sword of Gojoseon, and was more than 100 times stronger than the sword of Gojoseon. An alliance formed by 100 sword saints, just thinking about it was enough to make one feel shocked. And now, Chu Mu had only taken the first step on the path of Sword Dao, Sword Hero. In the future, there was still a long way for him to go. A broader world awaited him. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. The pressure in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace was strong enough to affect Chu Mu. Chu Mu had no choice but to strengthen his mental resistance. And this kind of resistance also had its benefits. It allowed his mental power and will to be constantly tempered, although the strength of the tempering was still not strong enough. After a year of cultivation, his sword chi had recovered to the initial chi C level. Within a year, he would definitely be able to recover to the minor completion level. As for his sword force, there was finally a slight improvement. Although it was not obvious, it was like a fuse. The lacerating concept and the concept of clouds had also been improved. Even Chu Mu had comprehended other concepts in the Sword Comprehension Hall, and they had all reached a certain level. A year has already passed. Chu Mu still hasn't left the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace? A faint sigh rang out in the darkness. It contained a hint of surprise. It seems like he can stay here for a longer period of time. I wonder how long he can stay? After saying that, the sigh went silent again, as if it had never sounded. In the blink of an eye, another month had passed. Old Tuo was shocked again because every month, the increase in pressure would become more and more obvious. Yet, Chu Mu still didn't have any intentions of leaving. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 452. Cultivate in seclusion for 2 years, soar to the sky, and become a sword saint in the future. There's a slight chance. Watching Chu Mu's departing figure, Elder Tuo sighed again. His voice was filled with envy, loneliness, and anticipation. The hall fell into a dead silence again. In the sky outside King City, a figure was flying away with a gust of wind. It was the wind-winged dragon. Compared to 2 years ago, the wind-winged dragon's body was much larger. Due to Chu Mu's large amount of beast cores, the wind-winged dragon had already reached the peak of the intermediate super level. Unfortunately, the wind-winged dragon's growth limit was the intermediate super level. It could only continue to grow and break through the intermediate super level to become an advanced super level beast. If he had killed the Thunderwing Golden Rock and obtained its beast core for the wind-winged dragon to consume, it would have indeed mutated the wind-winged dragon's bloodline. It could have reached the advanced super level at the very least. Fortunately, Chu Mu was only using the wind-winged dragon as a means of transportation. He was too lazy to look for any treasures that could mutate a beast's bloodline. After reaching the peak of the intermediate super level, not only was the wind-winged dragon bigger, it was also more ferocious. Its flying speed had also increased significantly. Chu Mu sat cross-legged on the wind-winged dragon's back like a statue, not moving at all. He was actually comprehending what he had learned in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace. Even the number 1 sword hero, Mu Longqing, could only comprehend in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace for a year. However, Chu Mu had stayed there for 2 years. This was all thanks to his powerful soul energy and deep understanding of the sword. The longer he stayed, the more he learned. There were tens of thousands of books in the book collection palace. Chu Mu used 2 years to finish reading nearly half of the books and memorize them in his mind. The time was too short. With only 4 hours of reading every day, Chu Mu could only choose the important books and choose the ones that were helpful to him to memorize. In this way, Chu Mu's knowledge had increased by more than 10 times. Even some 70 or 80-year-old swordsmen might not know as much as Chu Mu. In these 2 years, Chu Mu had removed the pure Sky Yuan sword qi from his body and trained the Sky Baron sword qi that was 10 times purer. His sword qi had returned to the peak of the low qi high realm, and was only 1 step away from reaching the Deshang realm. This time, the Heavenly Wasteland sword qi technique was different from the past. To a certain extent, it was equivalent to scrapping the foundation of the sword qi and starting from scratch. In addition, the purity of the Heavenly Wasteland sword qi was extremely high. As a result, Chu Mu spent a full 2 years to complete it. Chu Mu's sword qi was also at the small completion level. The amount of Tianhuang sword qi was not much greater than the Tianyuan sword qi, but its purity was more than 10 times greater. Even many peak qi high warriors' sword qi was not as pure as Chu Mu's, unless they trained in the top-rank Earth Realm sword qi. Furthermore, the Heavenly Wasteland sword qi had its own special characteristics, which made its power even more powerful. Even if he had not improved in any other areas, the current Chu Mu could easily defeat himself 2 years ago, because the Heavenly Wasteland sword qi was extremely powerful. In these 2 years, Chu Mu had seen many different sword arts through the sword scars in the Sword Comprehension Palace. Different sword arts contained different mysteries, which had greatly broadened Chu Mu's horizons and allowed him to comprehend many different mentalities. Now, besides the tearing mentality and the cloud mentality, Chu Mu had also comprehended the fire mentality, water mentality, earth mentality, wood mentality, thunder mentality, and ice mentality. He had also comprehended all 6 mentalities to 40% completion. As for the wind mentality and gold mentality, he had slightly comprehended them all into the tearing mentality. The tearing mentality had already reached 90% completion, and its power was equivalent to the gold mentality at 120% completion. The cloud mentality was harder to comprehend than the tearing mentality, so it had also reached 90% completion. The enhancement of the tearing mentality had an extremely obvious effect on Chu Mu's strength. The cloud mentality had reached 90% completion, and Chu Mu's flying swan illusory steps had also reached the 2nd level. The combination of the two was even more mysterious and exquisite. As for the other 6 mentalities, Chu Mu did not know what they were used for. If he wanted to comprehend them to the Deshang realm, he would have to spend a lot of time on Chu Mu. No matter how he looked at it, it did not seem worth it. But no matter what, the 6 more mentalities that had reached the small completion would not cause any hindrance to him. Maybe they would be useful in the future. The stone-shaking power had also broken through from the peak of the Deshang realm, reaching perfection. As for the other technique, the penetrating power, Chu Mu had also spent a lot of time comprehending and cultivating it. The stone-shaking power was the 2nd level of the Zhen Tian realm. The Zhen Tian school had already had a complete cultivation method. Even if the cultivation method after the stone-shaking power was lost, Chu Mu could still find some clues from the incomplete ancient books left behind by the Zhen Tian school. Then, according to his many years of cultivation and the growth of his knowledge, he could deduce it one by one. The penetrating power was different. At that time, the book given by the Inner Palace only had the most basic cultivation method of the penetrating power. It was very simple. Even if an ordinary swordsman obtained it, it would be very difficult to cultivate the penetrating power. Even if it was a swordsman with good talent, it would be impossible for him to get started without spending 3 to 5 years. Firstly, there was no complete cultivation method for the penetrating power, and there was no more theoretical research. Secondly, the penetrating power was more strange than the Zhen Tian realm, and it required a lot of skill. Chu Mu had just gotten started not long after he obtained the cultivation method for the penetrating power. But after that, His progress was very slow, and he did not have much time to properly comprehend and deduce it. This time, the 2 years of cultivation in the Eastern Sage Subpalace gave Chu Mu the perfect time to borrow the Zhen Tian realm system and look at the many sword scars in the Sword Comprehension Palace. Among those sword scars, there were very few traces of the technique of exerting force. Originally, Chu Mu's comprehension ability was monstrous. In the Sword Comprehension Palace, his comprehension ability had increased several times. Chu Mu had finally cultivated the basic penetrating power to perfection and created the second level, the stone shaking power. Although the name was simple, it directly described its effect. It could penetrate through rocks. This kind of penetration was not condensed into a line of penetration, but directly penetrating through the rock, without causing any damage to the rock. Chu Mu had also named this technique of exerting force as the penetrating power. Coincidentally, the penetrating power was also classified by Chu Mu as the 5th level, just like the Zhen Tian realm. However, the penetrating power was even more strange and unpredictable than the Zhen Tian realm. It was more than twice as difficult as the Zhen Tian realm. Chu Mu estimated that even if he cultivated the Zhen Tian realm to the 5th level, it would be hard to say if he could cultivate the penetrating power to the 4th level. Most importantly, Chu Mu's sword aura had improved from the peak of perfection, reaching the pinnacle of sword aura, and was even more powerful. Right now, Chu Mu could kill his old self with a single sword attack. 2 years of time had not only brought Chu Mu an increase in strength, but also broadened his horizons and accumulated knowledge. Most importantly, Chu Mu had completed the first closed-door training in his life, which would greatly improve his training in the future. The Wind-Winged Dragon was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had left the King City and was heading towards the Black Dragon Mountain. When the Inner Palace students saw Chu Mu return, they were shocked at first, but then they spread the news. When Duanmu Xing Kong heard that Chu Mu had not only reached the peak of the Lo Qi High Realm, he had also successfully challenged the Sword Hero and obtained the title of Zhen Tian Sword Hero, he was extremely shocked. 2 years of time, in just 2 years, Chu Mu had not only reached the peak of the Lo Qi High Realm, his strength was also extremely powerful, and he had obtained the title of Zhen Tian Sword Hero. Immediately, the entire Sword Palace was shaken. If before, Chu Mu only had some influence in the Inner Palace, then now, Chu Mu's name was known throughout the Sword Palace. Even the 3 Sons of Swords knew his name. Since ancient times, although there were not many students who had obtained the title of Sword Hero, there would always be a few. Batch after batch, there would always be a certain number. The most shocking thing was that when Chu Mu became a Sword Hero, he was only 20 years old. Becoming a Sword Hero at the age of 20, in the whole of the Great Kuan Dynasty's history, he was the only one. The only one in 1,000 years. What kind of glory and shock was this? At this moment, while the entire Sword Palace was shaken, many people shook their heads and sighed. Especially the elders of the Sword Palace, they were both extremely happy and ashamed. They secretly thought that they had wasted all their years of training. Compared to Chu Mu, they were just trash. Becoming a Sword Hero at the age of 20. The voice was filled with an overbearing aura. Brother Huang Tian, this Chu Mu's talent is really amazing. This light laughter was unique, and it was unforgettable for anyone who heard it. In this world, there are many talented people, but there are very few who can truly achieve the title of Sword Hero. Chu Mu was able to obtain the title of Sword Hero at the age of 20. It is not just a matter of talent. This voice was like the sound of a spring, and the sound of a zither lingered in the air for 3 days. So what if he has extraordinary talent? Even if he has a fortuitous encounter, it is impossible for him to catch up with us. This voice had an overbearing aura that made people feel hopeless. Haha, I do hope that he can catch up with us. The unique light laughter sounded. Then, another piece of news came from the Sword Palace. The son of the 3 swords, Little Heavenly King, Huangfu Huangtian, had announced that within 10 years, as long as Chu Mu was still on the ancient sword continent, he would personally deal with Chu Mu. In other words, there were only 10 years left for Chu Mu. 10 years? Chu Mu was instantly stunned. He did not expect that he would be targeted by one of the three swords, Little Heavenly King, Huangfu Huangtian, when he returned to the Sword Palace. Huangfu Huangtian had long possessed the cultivation of the Origin Realm, but he did not know what level he had reached. More importantly, he was also a sword venerable. The Little Heavenly King was the most overbearing person. He always acted according to his heart and did not care about what others said. Therefore, when his announcement was made, the entire Sword Palace was in an uproar. Of course, while there were countless people who admired Chu Mu, there were also many who were gnashing their teeth. Some were even envious and jealous. In short, Chu Mu's return stirred up a superstorm in the Sword Palace. As for himself, he was now meeting with his brother Chu Tian and the others and chatting. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 453. After 2 years, the eldest disciple Luo Yufeng, the second disciple, and the third disciple had all broken through to the Qi transformation realm and became inner disciples. Chu Tian and Chu Hong had also broken through to the Qi transformation realm and became inner disciples. In Chu Mu's sword tower, aside from Luo Yufeng and the other senior disciples, Chu Tian and Chu Hong, Chu He was also there. Chu He now had the cultivation of Qi transformation Deshang. Aside from his own talent, it was also because of some fortuitous encounters. In front of Chu Mu, Chu He didn't have his previous arrogance and was extremely humble. He deeply understood that the current Chu Mu was like an enormous dragon that controlled the 9 heavens, while he was merely a snake that slithered through the forest and looked up at the divine dragon in the sky. Chu He had also gone back to the Chu family. After seeing how the Chu family had grown, he understood that it was all because of Chu Mu's contribution. Thus, he respected Chu Mu even more. After talking for half a day, Chu Mu also learned about the situation of the other senior disciples. Most of them had entered the outer palace, and a few of them had returned to the Azure Sharp Sword sect. Even Li Wei and Luo Yuling were in the outer palace. After that, everyone left with some reluctance. Chu Mu also went to find Duanmu Xingkong, and then left the inner palace for the Wang Mansion. The Wang Mansion was located in a different place from the inner palace. Chu Mu was now a Zhentian sword hero. He did not need to take any tests and directly became a disciple of the Wang Mansion. Moreover, he was one of the top students. Coincidentally, one of the Wang Mansion's sword heroes had broken through to the 9th transformation realm and became a seed student. Our Wang Mansion has one less sword hero, and you can make up for it. The head of the Wang Mansion, Bailey Jianghe, said happily, and you are only 22 years old. Your future is limitless. The head of the Wang Mansion was very happy because there were originally 10 sword heroes in the Wang Mansion. These 10 sword heroes just happened to have an important mission soon. However, 2 years ago, the strongest sword hero had accumulated too much qi and was forced to break through to the 9th transformation realm. Therefore, there was one less sword hero among the 10. Therefore, by Li Jiang he had no choice but to select from the other Imperial Palace students. After a long period of selection, he finally selected a strong student who had reached the peak of Qi High as a replacement. Now that Chu Mu had returned to the Wang Mansion as a sword hero, he could fill in the vacancy for the position of sword hero. Because he had to carry out that important mission, the identity of a sword Grand Master would be more effective. If he was not a sword Grand Master, the final result would be less effective. Overjoyed, Bailey Jianghe immediately arranged for Chu Mu to stay in the sword tower. He also announced that one of the original 10 spots had been changed to Chu Mu. He also asked if Chu Mu had any requests. It could be said that the overjoyed Bailey Jianghe He had become very easy to talk to. Once the news came out, the Wang mansion was once again in an uproar. Senior Brother Chang, bad news. Bad news. A sword warrior at the Qi High realm rushed towards one of the sword towers. He slammed his palm onto the seal, causing countless ripples to appear. Chang Dongchen, who was meditating in the sword tower, appeared with a displeased face. He opened the seal and stared at the newcomer with a sharp gaze. If he did not explain himself, he would teach him a lesson as punishment for disturbing his meditation. Senior Brother Chang, your spot has been replaced, the newcomer said while panting. To be able to make a sword warrior at the Qi High realm pant like this, it showed how hurried he was when he arrived. What spot? Chang Dongchen frowned and did not react in time. It is one of the 10 spots for the fight for fortune. The sword warrior at the Qi High realm saw that Chang Dongchen did not react and quickly said, "What?" Chang Dongchen was shocked. In order to get this spot, he had fought many strong Qi High realm sword warriors and finally defeated them to get this spot. He originally thought that by using this spot to participate in the fight for fortune, his fortune would increase and it would be more helpful for his training in the future. He did not think that it would be replaced in the blink of an eye. Immediately, Chang Dongchen's face darkened. He glared at the sword warrior and said, "Are you sure you are not talking nonsense?" Chang Dongchen did not want to believe it. In the past, no matter how strong he was, he did not have a spot in the 10 spots. It was just that the strongest sword master could not suppress his cultivation and had to break through to the 9th transformation realm. There were no other sword masters in the Wang mansion. In the end, they could only choose the strongest one among the students who were not sword masters. Chang Dongchen was not a sword master and he had a deep hatred towards sword masters, no matter which sword master it was. He felt that it was unfair. Why was it that only those who had the title of sword master could have a spot? Why did he have to go through so many battles and defeat so many strong opponents to get this spot? He thought that his strength was not below that of a sword master. Even some of the weaker sword masters were not his match. It's true, Senior Chang. You have been training behind closed doors all this time and did not know. An inner house student named Chu Mu actually became a sword master and is now a student of the Wang mansion. The head of the Wang mansion gave your spot to Chu Mu. The sword warrior at the Qi High realm felt the pressure increase and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He quickly explained. Chu Mu. Sword master. Chang Dongchen's face darkened even more. He gritted his teeth in hatred. Suddenly, his eyes brightened as he remembered something. Chu Mu. Chu Mu. Could it be the Chu Mu that father mentioned in his letter? Tell me everything you know about this Chu Mu. Yes, Senior Chang. This Chu Mu. The sword warrior at the Qi High realm began to tell him everything he knew. Chu Mu became a sword master when he was 20 years old. He is now 22 years old. That is to say, he has only been a sword master for 2 years. Even if his strength increased, it would be limited. Chang Dongchen smiled coldly, but his eyes were dark and scary. I had the strength of a sword master 3 years ago. If it wasn't for the age difference, I would be a sword master now. 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to receive a sword Dao inheritance and my strength increased by leaps and bounds. Unless this Chu Mu also received a sword Dao inheritance, he would not be my match. Since that is the case, I will defeat you in front of everyone. First, I will avenge the Chang family, and second, I will let you know that just because you have the title of sword master, you can do whatever you want. Thinking up to here, Chang Dongchen's eyes brightened. There was a hint of conspiracy in his eyes. Listen up. Chang Dongchen began to send a message to the sword warrior at the Qi High realm. He explained his plan in detail and explained it to him. Do you understand? The eyes of the sword warrior at the Qi High realm became brighter and brighter as he listened. He kept nodding his head. He was Chang Dongchen's loyal follower. Senior Chang, this is a great plan. Once it is completed, even if this Chu Mu is a sword master, he will have no choice but to eat the dust obediently. He will not have the face to fight with you for this spot. The sword warrior at the Qi High Realm kept praising Chang Dongchen. Don't talk nonsense. Do it now. If anything goes wrong, I will not forgive you. Chang Dongchen said coldly. Senior Chang Dongchen, don't worry. I promise that this will be done properly. The sword warrior at the Qi High Realm patted his chest and said confidently. He immediately turned around and left to carry out his plan. Zhu Tianzhao, you never thought that this day would come, right? Chu Mu's eyes were cold as he looked at the person in front of him and said calmly. Indeed, I never thought that your life would be so tough. Not only did you not die so many times, but you also became so strong. Zhu Tianzhao gritted his teeth and said with a fierce look. He looked like he wanted to skin Chu Mu alive. The palace lord Bailey Jianghe had told Chu Mu that he could make a request. But in the end, Chu Mu's request was to have a life and death battle with Zhu Tianzhao. He wanted to kill Zhu Tianzhao with his own hands. Bailey Jianghe was very surprised by Chu Mu's request. After asking about the cause and effect, he agreed to Chu Mu's request. Although the students of the Sword Palace were very important, there was still a difference in importance. Not to mention that Zhu Tianzhao had plotted against Chu Mu many times and tried to kill Chu Mu. The unlucky Zhu Tianzhao had just finished a mission and was immediately targeted by Chu Mu. There was no way he could escape. Even though Zhu Tianzhao now had the sword Qi of the Qi High Realm, he was still not a match for Chu Mu. Zhu Tianzhao was very clear about this, as Chu Mu was a sword master. But Zhu Tianzhao was also very strong-willed. He did not beg for mercy. Chu Mu, Zhu Tianzhao is one of us. Although there was a conflict between you and him, you are still alive and unharmed. How about this? We will give you 100,000 mid-rank soul stones as compensation, and we will forget about the conflict between you and Zhu Tianzhao. A Peak Qi High Sword Warrior said loudly. This group of people used to be members of the Proud Sword Clan. After they all broke through to the Qi High Realm and became students of the palace, although there was a rule that only the Sky King Palace and the Pavilion of Sword and Heavenly Music were allowed to form other groups, they still worked together to support each other. As the previous leader of the Proud Sword Clan, Zhu Tianzhao was naturally one of them. In other words, Chu Mu killing Zhu Tianzhao was the same as offending all 20 of them. Unfortunately, Chu Mu did not care about these people. The strongest one was only at the peak of the Peak Qi High Realm, and he could kill them with a single sword strike. The cause of that day, the effect of today. Chu Mu said as he unsheathed the monster-slaying sword. A dark golden light pierced through the air. The cold light was like lightning. Zhu Tianzhao could not dodge it at all. In fact, he did not even think about dodging. He pulled out his sword and poured all of his sword qi into the sword. He also poured all of his sword qi into the sword. He did not care about the burden on his body as he performed his strongest sword attack. No matter what, if he fought with Chu Mu, he would die. If that was the case, he would have to injure Chu Mu before he died. This was Zhu Tianzhao's obsession. Like a moth flying into a flame, the sword charged towards Chu Mu with an indomitable will. Its aura was extremely bitter and soul-shaking. Kill, kill, kill. Only death awaited. Unfortunately, no matter how strong Zhu Tianzhao's willpower was, it was impossible for him to cross the gap of tens of times in strength. He, who had transformed into a tragic sword beam, was instantly struck by the dark golden sword beam. The sword beam paused for a moment before shattering. Zhu Tianzhao's body continued to charge forward, passing by Chu Mu's side and falling head first onto the ground, blood flowing everywhere. There was a bloody hole in his forehead, and red and white viscous liquid flowed out. His eyes were wide open, filled with despair, grayish-white color, and a strong unwillingness to accept this outcome. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 454. With Zhu Tianzhao dead, Chu Mu settled another grudge. As for the people of the Proud Sword Gang, if they were hostile and wanted to attack him, Chu Mu would not show mercy and killed them all. Unfortunately, they only dared to glare at Chu Mu a few times. At most, they threatened him with a few words and did not dare to take any action. After all, their strength was far inferior to Chu Mu's, and their status was even lower. After one wave of commotion, another wave of commotion arose. News spread from the royal residence, saying that Chu Mu relied on his status as a sword hero to snatch Chang Dongqin's spot in the battle for luck. They said that Chang Dongqin was stronger than ordinary sword heroes and had relied on her own strength to overcome one strong opponent after another, going through untold hardships to obtain a spot. Why was it that a sword hero was superior to others? Why was it that a sword hero could do whatever he wanted? Why was it that a sword hero could snatch someone else's achievement? Many swordsmen, who were jealous of Chu Mu, added fuel to the fire. Not only did the royal residence's swordsmen find out, but even the inner residence's swordsmen found out. Although many swordsmen acknowledged the status of a sword hero, with many people adding fuel to the fire, the situation escalated and affected a lot of people. It even caused a lot of negative effects. This was something that Bailey Jianghe did not expect. Even the sword residence's mansion master was alarmed and asked Bailey Jianghe to quickly resolve this matter. I did not consider this matter thoroughly, Bailey Jianghe said to Chu Mu, openly admitting his mistake. This made Chu Mu see him in a new light. Right now there are two solutions. First, you withdraw. The spot will still belong to Chang Dongqin, and I will personally compensate you to your satisfaction. Bailey Jianghe said seriously as he stared at Chu Mu. What about the second option? Chu Mu asked. He did not even consider the first option. He already knew the importance of that spot. It was a battle of destiny between the 10 great sword mansions of the 10 great dynasties of the Eastern Sword region. Theoretically, each sword mansion would send out 10 sword heroes. Most importantly, all the swordsmen who participated in the Battle of Karmic Luck would be able to share a portion of karmic luck. Even if they were completely defeated in the end, they would still be able to share a sliver of karmic luck. Luck was something that was illusory and omnipresent. With great luck, one's future would be limitless. Although no one could see their own luck, even Sword Saint would be envious of the slight increase in luck. The reason why sword masters were chosen to participate was because swordsmen who could become sword masters would have a trace of the power of providence the moment they became sword masters. If they had more providence, the effect would be more obvious than ordinary swordsmen. Since there was such a good thing, how could Chu Mu give up the spot? According to the original rules of the Sword Mansion, the spot belonged to him. Chang Dongqin was merely a substitute when the sword hero spot was empty. The second option is for you to fight with Chang Dongqin. As long as you defeat Chang Dongqin, the negative news will disappear, and the spot will belong to you. Bailey Jianghe said slowly, however, Chang Dongqin is very powerful. Ordinary sword masters would not be able to defeat him. Also, he had received a sword inheritance. You only became a sword master 2 years ago, and your sword chi is only at the peak of chi high. If you want to fight with Chang Dongqin, I am afraid that it will be a bit. What Bailey Jianghe meant was that he did not think highly of Chu Mu, because he did not know Chu Mu's strength at all. He was only estimating based on the normal progress. Normally, after becoming a sword master for 2 years, there would be an increase in strength, but it would not be very obvious, unless there was some kind of fortuitous encounter. But since it was a fortuitous encounter, how could it be so easy to encounter one? I choose the second option. Chu Mu replied indifferently. Alright, I will arrange it now. The battle between you and Chang Dongqin will take place in 3 days. Bailey Jianghe nodded. He had also guessed that Chu Mu would choose this option. After all, to be able to obtain the title of Sword Master, one must have a very strong will. He must have a lot of confidence in his own strength, and he would not give up just like that. Chang Dongchen is 35 years old this year, and he already had the strength of a sword master a few years ago. After he received the inheritance of the true aura sword art, his strength increased tremendously. It does not matter if you lose to him, you are still very young, and you still have a lot of time. With your talent, it will not take long for you to surpass him. True aura sword art. I will defeat him, Chu Mu said indifferently. There was an unquestionable confidence in his voice. I hope you can do it, Bailey Jianghe said with a smile. It sounded a bit perfunctory, but he still did not believe that Chu Mu could defeat Chang Dongchen from the bottom of his heart. Chu Mu did not argue. The reality in 3 days would let Bailey Jianghe know how wrong he was. The news of Chu Mu and Chang Dongchen's battle to determine the slots spread out very quickly. All sorts of discussions stopped as they waited for the final battle in 3 days. If Chu Mu won, it would not be a big deal. After all, he had the strength to prove that he had the qualifications to obtain a slot. However, if he lost, he would be criticized by many people. In a flash, 3 days passed. Chu Mu arrived at the location of the final battle, which was the largest sword arena in the Wang's residence. As he stood on the sword arena, Chu Mu closed his eyes. It was as if the people watching did not exist. The sword arena was filled with swordsmen. They were all students of the Wang's residence. There were also many elders of the Wang's residence. This slot was very important, and they had no choice but to show up. After a while, Chang Dongchen walked over as well. His figure leaped up, and he shot over like an arrow filled with power. An intense and sharp sound of wind breaking resounded. In the next moment, Chang Dongchen's figure landed on the sword arena. He was 100 meters away from Chu Mu. A powerful sword qi rippled out from his body. It was very shocking. It was filled with firmness and power. Wave after wave of sword qi filled the entire sword arena. Chu Mu, I advise you to admit defeat obediently. Otherwise, don't blame my sword for being merciless. Chang Dongchen shouted. His voice was like thunder, rumbling and rumbling. You aren't my opponent. Chu Mu's face was indifferent as he looked at Chang Dongchen and spoke neither slowly nor quickly. Arrogant. Soon, I will let you know how ignorant you are. Chang Dongchen's expression changed slightly. He was so angry that he laughed. In the spectator seats, Zhuge Ming and the other students who knew Chu Mu looked worried. They had all seen how powerful Chang Dongchen was. Therefore, they were very worried about Chu Mu's situation. Although Chang Dongchen's opponents did not die because of the sword residence's rules, they were all severely injured. It would take 3 to 5 months for them to recover. To a talented swordsman, 3 to 5 months was enough to increase the distance between them. Just at this moment, a figure silently appeared in the sword arena like a ghost. Between Chu Mu and Chang Dongchen was the manor lord of the royal residence, Bailey Jianghe. Although such a decisive battle was important, there was no need for Bailey Jianghe, the manor lord of the royal residence, to make a move personally. However, he was part of the reason for this. Furthermore, he planned to protect Chu Mu at the critical moment, preventing Chu Mu from getting severely injured. I will not say anything unnecessary. Remember, this is not a decisive battle to the death. You just need to defeat your opponent. Bailey Jianghe looked at Chu Mu before looking at Chang Dongchen. Then, he said solemnly, now let the decisive battle begin. Right after he spoke, Bailey Jianghe's figure flashed and appeared dozens of meters away like a ghost. At the edge of the sword arena, there was an empty space for Chu Mu and Chang Dongchen to fight. Chang Dongchen's aura suddenly burst out, becoming several times stronger. The impact of his aura actually caused a whistling sound like a storm. Every strand of his aura was very strong and filled with a terrifying power. He drew his sword and pointed it at Chu Mu. The blade of his sword was thicker and wider than a regular sword. The tip of the sword was oval, and its shape was very suitable for chopping. The ferocious aura turned into sword chi and charged over, wanting to crush Chu Mu. Chu Mu, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you obtained the title of Sword Hero. Today, I will let you know that the title of Sword Hero does not represent everything. Even if I did not obtain the title of Sword Hero, I still have the strength to defeat or even kill a Sword Hero. Chang Dongchen shouted, "Look at the might of my true aura Sword Dao." The terrifying aura instantly condensed around Bailey Jianghe's body. It was as if it had materialized, and there were faint strands of qi circulating around it. Every strand of qi felt as if it weighed hundreds of thousands of kilograms and could easily tear apart a high-grade sword. Bailey Jianghe swung his sword, and strands of tyrannical qi rushed towards Chu Mu like a storm. They were extremely ferocious and even more terrifying than 10,000 lightning bolts. Rumbling sounds echoed throughout the entire sword arena. It was as if the entire sword arena was about to shatter. The spectating swordsmen were all startled. Chang Dongchen's strength has improved again. A sword hero who came to watch said softly. This Chu Mu has only been a sword hero for a short period of time. Another sword hero said. Chang Dongchen thinks too highly of himself. He thinks that he inherited the true aura Sword Dao and actually dares to compare himself with a sword hero. Even if he can defeat Chu Mu in the end, it is only because his accumulation is deeper than Chu Mu's. The third sword hero snorted coldly and said, "After this battle, I will personally make a move. I will let him know the difference between him and a true sword hero." Dozens of strands of qi that seemed to weigh hundreds of thousands of kilograms charged towards Chu Mu. Everywhere they passed, the hard ground of the sword arena, which had been reinforced with seals, actually shattered into pieces. Then, they turned into dust under the impact of the qi. Bailey Jianghe watched with a serious expression. As long as Chu Mu was in any danger, he would immediately make a move. Chu Mu drew his sword at lightning speed. A 10-meter-long dark golden crescent moon tore through the air. If this sword light was magnified 1,000 times, one would discover that the entire dark golden crescent moon was vibrating at a high speed. However, it was too fast to be seen. The stone-shaking sword and the qi clashed. The qi in front of the qi shattered completely. The dark golden crescent moon charged forward and attacked Chang Dongchen, who was charging over at lightning speed. The essence of the true aura Sword Dao was toughness and strength. It was best at close combat. Every sword strike contained a terrifying might. Under the bombardment of the qi, Chang Dongchen wanted to use the momentum to get close to Chu Mu and defeat Chu Mu. The 10-meter-long sword light of the dark golden crescent moon was approaching. The sword light was too fast. Startled, Chang Dongchen quickly swung his sword to block. Boom! The sword light of the dark golden crescent moon shattered. Chang Dongchen's body flew back at an even faster speed like a broken doll. Poochie! Blood sprayed into the air. Everyone, including Bailey Jianghe, was stunned. Their eyes widened and their pupils constricted as they stared at Chang Dongchen, who had flown back several dozen meters and crashed heavily into the seal. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 455. Chang Dongchen actually lost. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? One sword, he defeated Chang Dongchen with just one sword. Impossible. This is illogical. After the initial shock, they all reacted and spoke with a face full of disbelief. If it was Chu Mu who was defeated by Chang Dongchen with just one sword, perhaps they would be surprised, but they could accept it in their hearts. At most, they would say that Chang Dongchen was powerful, and Chu Mu had just become a sword master, so his strength had not increased by much. But now, Chang Dongchen was defeated by Chu Mu with just one sword. This instantly overturned their thoughts and destroyed their worldview. The sword masters in the audience seats had their eyes bulging. Some of them thought that they could only fight to a draw with Chang Dongchen. Some thought that they could defeat Chang Dongchen, but they would need to go through a tough battle. Some were confident that they could defeat Chang Dongchen within 100 swords. None of them had the confidence to defeat Chang Dongchen with just one sword. Moreover, it was so clean that it gave them goosebumps. Perhaps only the sword master, who was originally the strongest in the prince's mansion, who had to break through because he had accumulated too much power, could do it. Bailey Jianghe looked at Chu Mu in a daze. He subconsciously recalled what he had said to Chu Mu before. He even thought from the bottom of his heart that Chu Mu could not be Chang Dongchen's opponent. Thinking of this, Bailey Jianghe suddenly felt ashamed. He was the master of the prince's mansion, a complete Origin Realm expert with rich experience and sharp eyes. But this time, he had actually misjudged. A weak groan was heard. Chang Dongchen's body trembled. His 10 fingers moved, and he struggled to sit up. His sword fell a dozen meters away. Chang Dongchen's face was pale. He coughed and his cheeks were dyed an unhealthy shade of red. His eyes were filled with complicated emotions. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He was filled with disbelief, fear, resentment, and so on. Waves of sharp pain came from his right hand. As he stood up, waves of pain came from his body. He knew that his right arm and internal organs were injured. With the degree of injury, it would be difficult to recover without 2 months of recuperation. In the past, this was how he dealt with his opponent. Now, the tables had turned, and it was his turn. Chang Dongchen took out a pill to treat internal injuries and swallowed it. After the pill dissolved, the medicinal efficacy spread throughout his body, nourishing his organs. The refreshing feeling made Chang Dongchen feel a little better. He glared at Chu Mu with hatred and unwillingness, then picked up his top-grade sword and turned around to leave the arena. His back was a little unsteady, and there was a huge difference compared to when he had arrived. It will probably take him 3 months to recover. Chu Mu thought to himself as he looked at Chang Dongchen's back. This time was even longer than what Chang Dongchen had estimated. This was because the heavenly desolate sword qi was still hidden in his body. He could not feel it now, but it would erupt soon and bring out the characteristics of the heavenly desolate sword qi. It was very difficult to deal with. Ha 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 ha. Good brat. Good brat. Bailey Jianghe laughed loudly, hiding the slight embarrassment in his heart. In this battle, one of the 10 spots for the karmic luck contest of the 10 sword palaces had finally come to an end. All sorts of negative rumors disappeared. Even if some people were unwilling, they didn't dare to bring it up again because Chu Mu had used his strength to convince everyone. He had let everyone know that he had obtained this spot and was fully deserving. Good brat. How did you do it? In the Manor Lord's sword tower, Bailey Jianghe's eyes were wide open. A bright light flashed in his eyes as he looked at Chu Mu's face. He then slowly looked down, as if he wanted to see through Chu Mu's entire body. Unfortunately, no matter how Bailey Jianghe looked at him, Chu Mu was still Chu Mu. He was still the same person he had seen before, a reserved sharpness. Naturally, I can do it if I am strong enough, Chu Mu replied with a faint smile. Nonsense. Of course, I can do it if I am strong enough. Bailey Jianghe's eyes widened. Then, he habitually stroked his short beard. However, what you said makes sense as well. As long as I am strong enough, there is nothing I cannot do. However, you have only been a sword hero for 2 years. How can you be so strong? Could it be that you obtained some sword Dao inheritance as well? Or did you run into some great fortuitous encounter in the past 2 years that allowed your strength to increase explosively? At this moment, Bailey Jianghe seemed to have turned into a curious child, his eyes shining brightly. Chu Mu felt uncomfortable being stared at by such a bearded man. He only wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. I have been in closed-door cultivation for the past 2 years, Chu Mu replied simply. Closed-door cultivation. Bailey Jianghe continued stroking his beard. Then, he He suddenly had a thought. Could it be that before you challenged for the Sword Hero title, you already possessed the strength of a Sword Hero? I am not sure about that. Chu Mu said, Lord Manor Lord, if there is nothing else, I intend to go back and rest. Don't be in such a rush. Do you know what the royal residence is saying about you now? Bailey Jianghe asked. I am not sure, Chu Mu replied. Actually, he had heard some of it. The top student of the royal residence, the strongest of the royal residence, and so on. I believe that you will have some trouble after this. However, it does not matter. If you did not use your full strength to defeat Chang Dongchen with one sword strike, then the trouble would not be trouble. Bailey Jianghe waved his hand as if chasing Xiao Chen away. Alright, you can go back. Remember, stay in the royal residence for this period and wait for the luck competition to start. Chu Mu nodded and quickly turned to leave. This brat. Looks like he has a lot of secrets. Bailey Jianghe stroked his chin with an inquisitive expression. However, he did not intend to take action. Who in the world did not have their own secrets? It was just a matter of how many there were. If he forcefully probed into other people's secrets, it might cause unnecessary disputes or even a fight to the death. The strongest of the royal residence. On the way back to the sword gauntlet, Chu Mu laughed lightly. To him, such a title did not have any benefit. Of course, it did not have any disadvantages as well. At most, it would only attract some unconvinced people to come and challenge him. After 2 years of seclusion in the Eastern Sage Branch Hall, Chu Mu's harvest was much greater than he had imagined. Hence, not only was he not afraid of challenges, he even hoped that there would be opponents strong enough to spar with him. This would allow him to deepen his understanding of seclusion. As expected, just as Chu Mu returned to the sword gauntlet, before he even entered, he received a challenge letter. It was from a sword grandmaster with the title of Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. Sometimes, a title could reveal a small part of a person's background. For example, Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. With just the name, one would know that this Sword Grandmaster was a Wind-type Sword Grandmaster. His attacks should be as ferocious as a hurricane, etc. Of course, he was not afraid that the other party would find out about his background through a title. That was merely an open secret. The true methods were still in his hands. The time for the challenge was tomorrow, and the location was one of the sword arena in the King's Manor. Chu Mu accepted it without hesitation. Zhen Tian Sword Grandmaster vs. Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. One was a new Sword Grandmaster, yet strong, while the other was a veteran Sword Grandmaster. This battle was highly anticipated. If Chu Mu had used his full strength to defeat Chang Dongchen, he might not be a match for the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. Who knows if that sword was Chu Mu's strongest sword? Who knows, it might just be a sword with decent power. Before the battle started, all sorts of discussions appeared. There were even people who started betting. The King's Manor did not restrict such bets, as long as there were no disputes after the battle. Chu Mu vs. Hurricane Sword Grandmaster, the odds were 1-1. After all, no one knew about Chu Mu's background. Chu Mu had also placed a bet of 500,000 middle-tier spirit stones. People like Zhuge Ming who were closer to Chu Mu all placed their bets on Chu Mu's victory. However, most of the students in the King's Manor had placed their bets on the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. They were more optimistic about the veteran Sword Grandmaster. When the time was up, the battle began. The Hurricane Sword Grandmaster's sword arts were indeed like a hurricane, extremely ferocious. Each sword brought up a strong gale, and its power was astonishing. It was a pity that although Chu Mu's sword arts seemed ordinary, it was able to turn something rotten into something magical, easily defeating the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster's sword arts and successfully counterattacking. After exchanging tens of blows, the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster displayed his sword moves, creating a raging gale. Chu Mu displayed the stone-trembling wave sword, unsurprisingly breaking through the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster's sword moves. With the second sword, he defeated the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. 90% tearing concept, stone trembling force, extreme sword force, extremely pure Tianhuang sword chi, stone trembling wave sword's power was unbelievable. For the first sword, the stone trembling wave sword, Chu Mu had only displayed 70% of its prowess. For the second sword, he had used 90% of its prowess to defeat the Hurricane Sword Grandmaster. After winning one battle, Fang Xinjian had familiarized himself with his comprehension of sword arts, and had even obtained an additional 500,000 mid-tier spirit stones. After that, every few days, there would be a sword grandmaster who would challenge Chu Mu, and Chu Mu would gladly accept. For the first few battles, there were still people who continued to place bet. In the end, after Chu Mu defeated his opponents time and time again, there were no more bets for the battles after that. It was because the students who started the bets were scared and had lost a lot of money. There were a total of 10 sword grandmasters in the Wang residence, and the other 9 had all battled with Chu Mu. All of them had been defeated by Chu Mu's sword. Of course, there were differences in the abilities of these sword grandmasters. Some had slight differences while others had huge differences. Therefore, the difficulty for Chu Mu to defeat them was also different. For example, when he defeated Sword Grandmaster Jiang Liken, Chu Mu had to use Stone Trembling Wave Sword and Space Shattering Sword Strike. After a tough battle, he finally defeated Jiang Liken. Naturally, this was under the circumstance that Chu Mu had not used his full strength. He believed that these sword grandmasters had not used their full strength as well, and all of them had their own hidden trump card. Once they fought, it would not be as simple as a competition. No matter what, Chu Mu, who had defeated the other 9 sword heroes in a short month, was unparalleled in the limelight, becoming the most influential person in the entire king's palace. The title of the strongest in the Wang residence fell on Chu Mu's head, and he was fully deserving of it. Because he was too strong, no one continued to challenge Chu Mu. Chu Mu could only stay in the sword gauntlet and cultivate in peace. He tidied up everything he had gained in the 2 years of seclusion in the Eastern Sage sub-hall and thoroughly absorbed it. After that, he recalled the battles with the other 9 sword grandmasters, absorbing their strengths and turning them into his own. Unknowingly, he had improved himself once again. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 456. There were tens of thousands of students in the Wang Mansion, and even more in the Sword Tower. Just like the inner mansion, it was divided into 4 levels: Heaven, Earth, Profound, and Yellow. Naturally, the spirit chi in the heaven-level sword tower was more abundant and pure. Originally, the sword tower that Bailey Jiang arranged for Chu Mu was the most common yellow-level sword tower. But after Chu Mu defeated Chang Dongchen, he took over Chang Dongchen's sword tower, the 10th heaven-level sword tower. Chu Mu was now training the Desolate Sky sword chi. To him, the purity and abundance of the spirit chi was no longer important. The most important thing was the abundance and purity of the Desolate Chi. Unfortunately, the Desolate Chi was too rare. It could only be felt in places like the Desolate Land. Although it could be felt in other places, it was extremely weak. If Chu Mu wanted to absorb the Desolate Chi in the air to train, it would take a long time before he could make any progress. Luckily, Chu Mu had the Desolate Stones, which were very different from Spirit Stones. Firstly, there was the energy contained within. One was pure Desolate Chi, while the other was pure Spiritual Chi. Secondly, there was a difference in quantity. A low-grade Desolate Stone contained far more pure Desolate Chi than a low-grade Spiritual Stone. Chu Mu had used 3,000 low-grade Desolate Stones to train the Desolate Sky Sword Chi to the peak of Chi High. The remaining low-grade Desolate Stones, Chu Mu estimated that it would be enough for him to train until the Astral Realm. As for when he reached the Astral Realm, he would make plans. The sword mansion was different from the outside world. Although there were fights, these fights were between students. Normally, there was no danger to one's life, and the purpose was to improve together. However, Chumu was too powerful right now. He was the #1 student of the Wang mansion. No one could beat him, so naturally, no one dared to challenge him. What was worth mentioning was that Chumu had automatically become the #1 on the silver sword ranking. It was publicly acknowledged, and no one dared to challenge him. Chumu spent every day cultivating the Sky Desolation sword chi, comprehending the laceration concept, and comprehending sword move. He also gave up on the cultivation of various ancient sword arts and focused on the sword skills he created. Every sword hero had a different path of sword Dao. Cultivating ancient sword arts was the same as following the path of the predecessors. It might increase one's strength in the beginning, but it would affect one's strength quite a bit. In the future, one would have to gradually break away from this influence. Every swordsman's path of growth was more or less the same. At the beginning, they would cultivate various sword techniques before cultivating ancient sword technique. If it was just a swordsman with average talent, they would continue on this path until they could no longer improve. Swordsmen with extraordinary natural talent were different. If they wanted to walk on the path of the sword Dao and go further on the path of the sword Dao, then they had to abandon the influence of their predecessors and create their own sword skills because only they knew what was most suitable for them. If he didn't even know what he was suited for, he wouldn't be able to go far on the path of the sword. After every swordsman became a sword hero, they would use a period of time to get rid of the influence of their predecessors. They would then extract the essence of all the ancient sword arts they had cultivated and transform them into a sword skill that was most suitable for them. The laceration concept had reached 90%, which was Deshang's limit. Once it reached 90%, it would be perfect. Once it reached 100%, it would be perfect, and its power would be even more powerful. But to increase the concept from 90% to 100% was very difficult, especially for a high-level mutated concept like the laceration concept. Because of its shocking power, the difficulty of comprehending it increased by a few times. Luckily, after Chumu reached the Qi High Realm, part of his powerful soul had been opened up, and his comprehensive ability had increased again. After becoming a sword hero, he had gained a bit of luck, and his comprehensive ability had increased again. Even so, if he wanted to comprehend the laceration concept from 90% to 100%, it would still take a long time. His cloud concept had also reached 90%, but he had to put it aside for now. His sword aura had reached the peak of sword aura. If he continued to comprehend it, he would have a breakthrough. The second step of the sword Dao, sword intent. But, if he wanted to comprehend the sword intent, it would be extremely difficult. Since ancient times, there had been countless swordsmen who were stuck at the peak of sword aura, unable to make a breakthrough. In the end, they could only leave with regrets. Cultivating in the East Saint Sub-Palace for 2 years, he would spend every day in the Sword Comprehension Palace to comprehend the sword scars. Some of the sword scars were left behind by the swordsmen who had comprehended the sword intent. With Chumu's powerful comprehensive ability, he could observe and comprehend the sword scars from shallow to deep. Gradually, they formed a brand in his mind, making it easier for him to comprehend them in the future. Although the effect was not as obvious as directly facing the sword scars in the Sword Comprehension Palace. In the blink of an eye, time passed peacefully. Another month had passed. Chumu went to the Sword Comprehension Room as usual. There was a Sword Comprehension Room in the Inner Palace. As a place of a higher level than the Inner Palace, the King Palace naturally had a Sword Comprehension Room as well. The Sword Palace had special treatment for sword heroes. Any sword hero could use the Sword Comprehension Room for 4 hours every day for free. This was extremely good news for Chumu. After entering the Sword Comprehension Room, Chumu sat down cross-legged and removed all distracting thoughts. Soon, he entered an ethereal state. His thoughts became extremely clear, reaching everywhere. In his mind, sword scars appeared one after another. These sword scars were arranged in an orderly manner. Every sword scar was different, and everything contained within was obviously different as well. Following that, all the sword scars flickered until only the most obvious sword scar was left. It gradually enlarged and became clearer, filling up Chu Mu's mind as if it was going to be branded into his mind. This was the most shallow sword scar among all the sword scars that contained the sword intent. Chu Mu didn't dare to bite off more than he could chew. Only by starting from the shallow would he be able to go deeper. Wholeheartedly comprehending the sword scar that filled his mind, Chu Mu felt that he had gained something as time passed. It was a very vague feeling. It was hazy, like looking at flowers in a fog. It seemed that as long as the fog on the window was wiped away, he would be able to see the beautiful scenery outside. However, the fog seemed to be inside the window. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wipe it away. It remained hazy. Chu Mu knew that it wasn't that he couldn't wipe it away, but that he hadn't found the correct method. As long as he found the correct method, he could easily wipe away the fog and see the beautiful scenery outside. Very quickly, 8 hours passed. Chu Mu woke up. He got up, opened the door, and walked out of the sword comprehension room. Compared to the sword comprehension hall, the sword comprehension room didn't increase one's comprehension as much. With the obvious increase in comprehension in the sword comprehension hall, Chu Mu hadn't been able to comprehend the sword intent after 2 years, let alone 2 months in the sword comprehension room. More haste, less speed, Chu Mu said in a voice that only he could hear. He was very open-minded. He strode in the direction of the 10th heaven-level sword tower. A cool breeze blew in his face. Occasionally, there would be students coming and going. When they saw Chu Mu, they would all stop and salute him with their sword. Even if they didn't salute him, they would still show a trace of respect. The title of the strongest in the king's residence was indeed not bad. Sword intent, the will of the sword, the spirit of the person. Chu Mu nodded to the students saluting him as he thought to himself. He organized his understanding of the way of the sword over the past 2 years. Spirit and will as one man and sword as one man is the sword, sword is man. The deeper one's understanding of the sword, the more the will of the sword is displayed through the spirit of the person, that is sword intent. Chu Mu's steps became very slow. Every time he lifted his foot, it would be fixed in the air for a few breaths. A thought flashed through his mind before he could put it down again. Step by step, a mere 100 meters took Chu Mu nearly a quarter of an hour. The thoughts in his mind gradually became clearer and clearer, and the fog seemed to be wiped away. Just then, Chu Mu lifted his foot again and couldn't put it down for a long time. It was as if he was bound. He had a feeling that as long as he took this step, the fog would disperse and the true face of the sword intent would appear in front of his eyes. However, this step was extremely difficult. It was as if there was an invisible mountain beneath his feet that was obstructing him. There was some struggle on his face. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu suddenly withdrew his step and recovered his indifferent expression. Since he couldn't put it down, there was no need to force it. He had already organized his understanding of sword intent and was even clearer. There was only one last step left. Chu Mu was confident that after a period of time, he would be able to truly take that step and comprehend sword intent. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. In the sword comprehension room, Chu Mu's tightly closed eyes suddenly opened. A bright light flashed in his eyes. This bright light was completely different from before. It seemed to be even more condensed and pure. This bright light was as fine as the demon-slaying sword's edge. When it shot out, it directly cut the air in front of it, leaving behind a fine mark before it disappeared. As the bright light was withdrawn, Chu Mu's lips curled up in a smile. He had finally taken the final step of the extreme sword stance and successfully comprehended sword intent. Although it was just one strand of sword intent, Chu Mu knew that this was the first step to success. With this start, it would not be so difficult to comprehend sword intent in the future. In the blink of an eye, another 3 months passed. The 10 sword heroes of the sovereign's residence received a notice and gathered at the sovereign's sword tower. The decennial battle for fortune of the 10 dynasties of the eastern sword region is about to begin. I'll give you 4 hours to prepare. After that, we will depart. Bailey Jianghe went straight to the point. Chu Mu and the other 10 sword heroes were startled at first. Then, they revealed different expressions. The only thing they had in common was that their heartbeats suddenly sped up, and their blood flowed faster. Their bodies were filled with energy, and their hearts were filled with battle intent. The battle for fortune was finally about to begin. This was the battle between the sword heroes of the 10 dynasties. Just thinking about it made one's blood boil. The 10 sword heroes finished their preparations very quickly. Under Bailey Jianghe's lead, they immediately left the sovereign's residence and the sword palace's emptiness realm. They rode on the mid-grade flying demonic beasts, purple-crowned cranes, and headed towards the gathering point of the battle for fortune, East Saint City. 22 purple-crowned cranes were flying in the sky. There was a figure on each purple-crowned crane. Aside from the 10 sword heroes and Bailey Jianghe, there were also 10 elders of the sovereign's residence accompanying them. Each of the elders had late astral realm sword chi cultivation. It was a very powerful lineup. Aside from them, there was also a person who looked to be less than 30 years old. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and he always had a smile on his face. It seemed like his eyes could not be opened naturally, and he could only see through a small gap. Chu Mu and the other 10 sword heroes realized that both the elders of the sovereign's residence and Bailey Jianghe, the sovereign of the sovereign's residence, were very respectful to this young man. When Chu Mu and the other 10 sword heroes found out about his identity, they were even more shocked. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 457. Supreme Sword, also known as Supreme Sword Master Chen Bu, one of the 3 sons of swords. Chu Mu muttered to himself. He could not help but take a few more glances at Chen Bu. Just from his appearance, it was impossible to tell that this young man, who always had a smile on his face, was a sword master because the aura he gave off was not strong at all. It was like a breeze, and there was no sense of oppression at all. Chen Bu was the strongest among the 22 people. He accompanied them to ensure their safety and prevent accidents from happening. On the other hand, he was escorting a treasure that was extremely important to the sword mansion. The purple-crowned crane and the red-crowned crane belonged to the same race. They were like commoners and nobles among the demonic beasts. Thus, there were only a few thousand purple-crowned cranes in the king's mansion. They were very precious. In terms of flying speed, the purple-crowned crane was not as fast as the wind-winged dragon, but it was not slow either. In terms of endurance, it was above the wind-winged dragon. After flying for a day and a night, it could continue flying after resting for 4 hours. In the beginning, everyone would chat casually. After a few days, everyone fell silent and sat on the back of the purple-crowned crane to meditate. I was not as strong as you when I was your age. Chen Bu sat beside Chu Mu and said softly. His tone was somewhat joyful. His voice had a very unique rhythm that would make one feel that it was unique and unforgettable after hearing it. I still have a long way to go, Chu Mu said with a smile. He did not feel uncomfortable or nervous when facing Chen Bu. Huangfu Huangtian said that he would deal with you in 10 years. He was not joking. Chen Bu said softly, there are still 9.5 years left. I hope you can become a sword master by then. I will. Chu Mu's tone was calm, revealing great confidence. If you can fight with Huangfu Huangtian by then, maybe my hands will be itchy too, Chen Bu said with a smile. He leaned against the tree trunk leisurely and did not say anything else. Chu Mu smiled and closed his eyes to meditate. The others heard the short conversation between him and Chen Bu'er and felt a little envious because Chen Bu'er would not take the initiative to talk to them. The night was silent. The sky had just brightened. Everyone set off again after eating. Rushing from the Great Kuan dynasty to the East Sage City would take a relatively long time, so everyone had no choice but to set off in advance. Every day, other than riding the purple-crowned crane, he rested. Whether it was on the purple-crowned crane's back or resting time, Chu Mu spent most of his time in meditation. Half a year of cultivation in the Wang Mansion had allowed his lacerating concept to reach 94%. He had also comprehended sword intent, successfully taking the second step of sword Dao and comprehending sword intent to 30%. The power of the three parts sword intent was several times stronger than the extreme sword force from before. The difference between the two was like the difference between wood and steel. Every day, they only rested for 6 hours and used 18 hours to travel. It took them half a year to reach the East Sage City from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. East Sage City, the #1 city in the Eastern Sword region. Majestic, ancient, and immortal auras were all present in the city. Even a sword saint like Chen Bu would feel insignificant in front of this immemorial city. Perhaps, only those who had reached the sword of Gojoseon's level could avoid this influence. Let's go and rest in the city first. The battle for Providence will start soon. You all need to adjust your state. Bailey Jiangchen woke up from his shock and waved his hand, waking everyone up. Since it was their first time in the East Sage City, the normal thing to do was to walk around and take a good look at this ancient city. However, Chu Mu and the others had been traveling for half a year. Even though they had rested every day, they were still quite tired after a long time, especially in terms of mental exhaustion. There was a East Sage Palace in the East Sage City. It was the ruler of the East Sage City. As one of the 10 great sword mansions participating in the battle for Providence, their accommodations had already been arranged. The Great Kuan Garden was the temporary residence of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. It was very big, and there were artificial mountains, ponds, pavilions, and so on. There was also a bamboo forest. The scenery was very beautiful, and the spiritual qi was several times more abundant than the heavenly sword tower in the Wang Mansion. The living environment was very comfortable and pleasant. No matter how abundant the spiritual qi was, it would not be of any help to Chu Mu's cultivation. However, places with abundant spiritual qi often had beautiful environments that made people feel comfortable and relaxed from the bottom of their heart. Not only was it beneficial for living, but it was also beneficial for cultivation. Chu Mu also had a good sleep. When he woke up 6 hours later, he felt refreshed. Regardless of whether it was his physical or mental exhaustion, they were all gone. After walking out of the room, Chu Mu walked into the forest outside. He did not think about anything, and his mind was in a state of emptiness. Coincidentally, the other 9 sword heroes also appeared one after another. They did not look tired at all, and their eyes were shining brightly. Clearly, they had all recovered to their peak states after resting. They chatted as they walked, and unknowingly, they walked out of the Great Kuan Garden. Our Great Kuan Sword Mansion declined after a great calamity 60 years ago. Since then, we have been at the bottom of every battle for Providence. This has also prevented our Great Kuan Sword Mansion from rising again. Sky Sword Hero Fu Yunxiao said as he walked. His face flashed with incomparable determination. This time, we will reverse the previous bottom ranking. We must defeat the other sword mansions and obtain more providence, allowing the Great Kuan Sword Mansion to rise again. Senior brother Fu is right. This time, we must do our best to rewrite history and create glory again, Blazing Fire Sword Hero Long Lai said. All of them were rubbing their hands, waiting for the battle for Providence to begin. They wanted to defeat the sword heroes of the other sword mansions and obtain more providence, allowing the Great Kuan Sword Mansion to gradually regain its glory from 60 years ago. Aren't you afraid of biting your tongue when you talk big? Not far away, a cold snort sounded. It was filled with disdain. For the past few decades, the great Koan sword mansion has been at the bottom. This is an indisputable fact. No matter how big your words are, it will not change this fact. Chu Mu and the rest looked over and saw a group of people walking over from the opposite side. The living quarters of the 10 major sword mansions in the East Sage Hall were arranged very cleverly. In the middle was a circular empty space. It was very spacious, and in the middle of the empty space was a garden. The mansions of the 10 major sword mansions were located at the edge of the circular empty space. What was more interesting was that the Great Koan Garden was directly opposite the Great Qian Garden. It was unknown if it was a coincidence or if the East Sage Hall did this intentionally. In the past, before the start of the battle for Providence, there would inevitably be some conflicts here. The group of people who spoke walked out from the Great Qian Garden. They were the sword heroes of the Great Qian Sword Mansion. Whether I am talking big or not, you will know when the time comes. Fu Yunxiao waved his sleeves and said in a deep voice, I don't think there is a need to wait. Why don't you let us know now? This was another sword hero of the Great Qian Sword Mansion, and he said cheekily. Let's go, Chu Mu said plainly and turned to walk towards the Great Koan Garden. Humph! The blazing fire sword hero and the rest snorted. They glanced at the 9 sword heroes of the Great Qian Sword Mansion and turned to walk towards the Great Koan Garden. There was no benefit to having a conflict here. The best counterattack would be to wait until the battle for Providence began before using all their strength to defeat the other party and snatch the Providence from the other party. Stop right there. Which one of you is Chu Mu? One of the 9 sword heroes said coldly. They didn't want to cause a conflict here as it wasn't a wise choice. What can I do for you? Chu Mu stopped and turned around. You are Chu Mu? You are indeed very young. The sword hero who spoke walked a few steps forward and stared coldly at Chu Mu. He had a weird smile on his face and said, Peak of the Qi High Realm. It seems like the Great Koan Sword Mansion has no one else. They even sent a Peak of the Qi High Realm student to participate in the battle for Providence. Junior brother Yao, you can't say that. He is a new sword hero, and I heard that he became a sword hero at the age of 20. He is the only one in the Great Koan dynasty in the past 1,000 years. His future is limitless. Another sword hero from the Great Qian Sword Mansion said with a weird tone. Among the 10 dynasties, the Great Koan dynasty had the least number of sword heroes. The other 9 dynasties all had at least 100 sword heroes. No matter what, the appearance of a new sword hero was not a small matter, and it would attract the attention of everyone. The other dynasties already knew that there was a new sword hero in the Great Koan dynasty. His title was Zhen Tian, and all kinds of information about this Zhen Tian sword hero had been dug up. Becoming a sword hero at the age of 20 was indeed shocking, but in other dynasties, it wasn't as if such geniuses didn't exist. Adding on the fact that hearing was false and seeing was believing, as well as other factors, it caused them to look down on Chu Mu, a 20-year-old sword hero. Sword hero Zhen Tian. What an imposing manner. I heard that a few years ago, you defeated an inner house student who came to the Great Koan Sword Mansion for an exchange. That sword hero with the surname Yao sneered and said, Remember, that is only child's play. The battle between sword heroes is the real battle. When the battle for Providence begins, you better pray that you don't meet me. Otherwise, I will let you know how it feels to be defeated by a single sword strike. I'll accompany you anytime. I hope you have the strength. Chu Mu responded indifferently. In fact, aside from Chu Mu, the other sword heroes were all at the peak of the consummation of the Qi High Realm. Although Chu Mu's strength had not been tested, he was confident that even Mu Longqing might not be able to defeat him. In Chu Mu's opinion, the threat of this sword hero with the surname Yao was not worth mentioning. The battle for Providence was a battle with the sword heroes of the other sword mansions. Whether one defeated the other party or was defeated by the other party, they would meet sooner or later. After Chu Mu's group of 10 returned to the Great Kuan Garden, Chu Mu asked about the information of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword heroes. Just then, Bailey Jiang he came back from outside with a book. This is the information of the 100 sword heroes from the 10 great sword mansions participating in the battle for Providence. You all are among them. Take a good look and understand your opponents, Bailey Jianghe instructed as he put down the book. Just what I wanted. Jiang Liken smiled as he grabbed the book and started flipping through it. Only by knowing the enemy and knowing oneself can one be undefeated. On the surface, one might look down on the enemy, but in one's heart, one had to value the enemy. Only then would one not make the mistake of underestimating the enemy, which would lead to a regretful defeat. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 458. After resting for a day, Bailey Jiang he gathered the 10 sword heroes, the 10 elders, and the Honorable Sword Saint Chenbuer to the main hall of the East Sage Palace. When Chu Mu and the others arrived at the main hall, the other sword manners had just arrived. The 10 sword manners lined up in order, waiting for the people from the East Sage Palace to appear. The battle for fortune that happened once every 10 years was of great importance. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to host it. If the 10 sword manners were to host it, the other sword manners wouldn't feel at ease. If the 10 sword manners were to send out a group of people to host it, it would inevitably lead to some dispute. The best way was to send someone unrelated to the 10 sword manners to host it. Furthermore, they must have sufficient strength and status. After thinking about it, only the people from the East Sage Palace had the qualifications to host it. If one had to say which power was the strongest in the entire East Sword domain, it would undoubtedly be the East Sage Palace. This old man is very honored to be the judge of this year's battle for fortune. An old man appeared in the main hall of the East Sage Palace and said with a smile. The aura on his body was obscure and undetectable. This year's battle for fortune will still be held at the Heaven Battling Sword Arena in the East Sage City. At that time, you will have an exciting battle under the eyes of everyone. The Heaven Battling Sword Arena was the largest sword arena in the East Sage City. It also belonged to the East Sage Palace and could hold 1,000,000 people at the same time. The most peculiar thing was that the Heaven Battling Sword Arena occupied a very small area in the East Sage City because it was a half-void boundary. The battle for fortune that happened once every 10 years was a grand event in the entire East Sword domain. The news had already spread out. Many powerful swordsmen had come here to witness this grand event that happened once every 10 years. An exciting battle between 100 sword heroes. A battle between sword heroes was already very rare. How lucky was it to be able to watch a battle between 100 sword heroes at such a close distance? If they missed it, they would be so regretful that they would kill themselves. Not only was it an honor to watch a battle between 100 sword heroes, they might even be able to comprehend something from it. It would be helpful to improve their sword arts or cultivation. Not long after, under the lead of the East Sage Hall's Elder Tang, the swordsmen from the 10 great sword manors entered the heaven-deciding sword field. Then, many swordsmen who wanted to watch the battle for karmic luck also entered. Although the heavenly decisive sword field could hold 1,000,000 people, there were more than 1,000,000 people who wanted to watch. A group of people flooded into the gate and entered the heavenly decisive sword field. The heaven battling sword field was surrounded by trapezoidal seats, which were spacious enough. Fortunately, we managed to snatch the sword token to enter the heaven extinguishing sword field half a year ago. Otherwise, I'm afraid we could only stay outside this time. An exciting battle between 100 sword heroes. These 10,000 mid-grade spirit stones were well spent. I really hope that the duel will start soon. There's no hurry. This is the once-in-a-decade battle for karmic luck. before the battle begins, there are still many important segments that must be completed. Otherwise, the battle of karmic luck this time will be nothing, said the swordsman who had watched the last battle of karmic luck in the past. He seemed to know the ins and outs of the battle very well. What segment? Someone nearby was immediately intrigued, and asked with great interest. Soon, you will see it with your own eyes, the man said mysteriously. Heavenly Sword of Destiny. Elder Tang floated in the air above the heaven-battling sword field. He opened his arms as if he wanted to embrace the entire world. His voice was grand and imposing, spreading throughout the entire heaven-battling sword field like rolling thunder. Chun Bu-er, the supreme sword venerable, was among them. Chu Mu swept his gaze across them and discovered that the auras of the other 9 were also very obscure. Thinking about it, they should also be sword venerables. Chun Bu-er and the others waved their hands and a beam of light shot out into the sky. The 10 beams of light formed a circle and rotated slowly. Wave after wave of vast aura swept out like a cool breeze, filling the entire heaven-deciding sword field. Everyone who was bathed in this unique aura felt the distracting thoughts in their minds disappear. Their minds became extremely clear, their ears and eyes became sharp, and their bodies also became light, as if they had been stripped of all their baggage. The power of destiny. This is the power of destiny. A small number of swordsmen who knew the details all roared out. Even though they knew it was only a temporary effect, the feeling was just too wonderful. Under the influence of the power of destiny, a small number of swordsmen immediately felt their bottlenecks loosen, as if they could break through at any time. Chu Mu and the others were already supported by the power of destiny that surpassed ordinary swordsmen. Now that they bathed in the vast power of destiny, they only felt like their power of destiny had been activated and strengthened several times over. For a moment, various comprehensions appeared in their heads. Unfortunately, this lasted for too short a time. Before Chu Mu and the others could comprehend anything, the vast power of destiny suddenly converged and gathered on the 10 small swords at the very top of the heaven-battling sword field again. They shone brightly and created a myriad of phenomena. Following that, earth-shaking dragon roars rang through the sky. The 10 heaven-battling swords of destiny shook and turned into 10 golden dragons, soaring above the heaven-battling sword field. Destiny dragons. Every swordsman below looked up at the 10 golden dragons. They all had looks of admiration, awe, or greed. This was the power of destiny that was so dense that it had condensed into substance. The power of destiny contained within was unimaginable. The 10 destiny dragons varied in length. The shortest was 12 meters long, while the longest was 150 meters long. The others were 130 meters long, 120 meters long, 110 meters long, and so on. All in all, the total length of the 10 destiny dragons was exactly 99 meters long. 99 meters was an extreme number. Legend had it that once it broke through 300 meters there would be some kind of unpredictable change. No one knew if the change was good or bad. The shortest destiny dragon, that was 40 meters long, belonged to the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, while the longest belonged to the Great Qian Sword Mansion. Every inch of difference in the destiny dragons would result in an obvious difference in the power of destiny contained within, let alone a difference of 33 meters. How great would it be if I could obtain one of the destiny dragons? Many people had such thoughts. Just think about it. Even if they obtained the shortest destiny dragon that was 40 meters long, the unimaginably vast power of destiny would be enough for them to become a supreme prodigy since ancient times. From then on, their path would be smooth sailing, and it was even possible for them to become a sword saint or an even higher existence. Unfortunately, it was only a fantasy. Since ancient times, there had never been a case where the power of destiny could be controlled. At most, it would be a slight influence caused by humans. Moreover, whoever had the most destiny dragons had the most destiny dragons. Everything had long been predestined. Forcefully adding destiny dragons to one's body would only lead to one's destruction in the end. Not everyone could bear the power of destiny dragons. To use the simplest analogy, it was like a lot of treasures. If someone with power and influence obtained treasures, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. If someone without power and influence obtained treasures, it would be an unexpected disaster. Everyone's gaze was attracted to the 10 destiny dragons. They were like iron shavings attracted by magnets, unable to look away. The 10 destiny dragons of different lengths constantly swam in the sky. They were extremely fast, and they left behind streaks of golden light that crisscrossed in the sky. Immediately after, the 10 destiny dragons let out dragon roars that resounded through the clouds. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. The 10 destiny dragons were devouring each other. In a short span of 3 breaths, the 10 dragons of Providence had vanished. Only a huge golden dragon that was 999 meters long remained. Waves of majestic dragon roars resounded, impacting everyone. Let's invite the 100 participating sword heroes onto the stage. Elder Tang of the East Sage Hall reacted and shouted at the same time as the dragon roars. Chu Mu and the other 100 sword heroes from the 10 great sword manors woke up one after another. They executed their movement techniques and landed on the huge sword battle arena, standing in their respective camp. The 999-meter-long luck dragon circled around in the sky before diving down, creating a loud sonic boom. Powerful airflow blasted out and turned into a gale, causing Chu Mu and the others' clothes to flutter. In the blink of an eye, the 99-meter-long destiny dragon rushed past Chu Mu and the other 100 sword heroes and soared into the sky again. Chu Mu and the others only felt as if their bodies were being taken away by something. Immediately after, the destiny dragon that soared to the highest point suddenly blossomed with an incomparably resplendent golden light, turning into a dazzling sun. With a boom, it exploded and turned into 100 golden rays that shot down. Every golden ray was a small dragon. The 9-meter-long destiny dragons entered the bodies of Chu Mu and the other 100 sword heroes in the blink of an eye. They then rushed out of the bodies of the 100 sword heroes and coiled around their bodies. After 3 breaths, they entered their bodies. Chu Mu and the others all felt the feeling of hearing and seeing clearly as if all the dust had disappeared reappear. Everything around them became extremely clear. Even the fine dust in the air seemed to be clearly visible. Of course, this was also because they'd obtained such a huge boost from the energy of karmic luck. Compared to the karmic luck they possessed, this boost was at least a few tens of thousands of times greater. Moreover, this was merely the most obvious benefit of the energy of karmic luck. All the sword heroes looked enviously at Chu Mu and the others. Receiving the boost of destiny force, and a 9-meter-long destiny dragon at that, the effect was incomparably shocking. Although they couldn't possess it for a long time, at least in the final battle of the destiny force, they would receive the boost of the destiny dragon. Their strength would definitely increase by a lot in a short period of time. No matter what the final result was, in short, they were starting to reap the benefits now. Everyone, return for now. Elder Tang of the Eastern Sage Hall waved his sleeves and said loudly. The 10 sword venerables and the 100 sword heroes all returned to their sword manors because they all knew that the first segment of the Destiny Force had ended. Next, the second segment would begin. The true battle was about to begin. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 459. Elder Tang of the East Sage Palace hovered above the heaven-extinguishing sword arena and announced the rules of the battle for karmic luck. Other than killing people, he could do anything else, even if he had to cripple someone. How could one obtain benefits without paying a price? There was no such thing as a free meal in this world. Other than explaining the rules, Elder Tang also briefly explained the method of the battle between the 100 sword heroes. Each of the 100 sword heroes would be arranged for a battle, but it would not be repeated. In other words, after the battle between Sword Hero A and Sword Hero B, they would continue to fight. However, their opponents would not be each other but other people. Every sword hero would go through a battle. If they won, they would devour 10% of their opponent's karmic luck. If they lost, they would lose 10% of their own karmic luck. In the end, the sword heroes who won continuously would not only obtain the title of the strongest sword hero in the 10 great sword palaces, they would also be able to obtain 1% of the karmic luck of the other 99 sword heroes. In addition, the top 3 sword heroes in the battle for karmic luck would have a chance to enter the East Sage Hall and cultivate for half a year. Just thinking about it, cultivating in the East Sage Palace could increase one's foundation or strength by a lot. As the headquarters of the East Sage Palace, the foundation of the East Sage Palace would be even deeper. Cultivating there for half a year would definitely bring great benefit. If the final benefits of the battle for karmic luck belonged to the sword palaces, then the benefits of cultivating in the East Sage Palace for half a year would belong to the individual. Bailey Jiang swept his gaze across Chu Mu and the other sword heroes and said with a serious expression, "This time, you have to do your best to defeat the enemy and obtain more karmic luck to strengthen the Great Kuan Sword Palace, allowing the Sword Palace to gradually regain its glory. Palace Lord, rest assured. Even if I have to risk my life, I will obtain more karmic luck to restore the Great Kuan Sword Palace to its former glory." Fu Yunxiao said with an incomparably serious expression. It was an answer to Bailey Jiang and also an encouragement to himself. The other sword heroes, including Chu Mu, all had a serious expression. They were the disciples of the Great Kuan Sword Palace. Aside from their own efforts and fortuitous encounters, it was also inseparable from the nurturing of the Great Kuan Sword Palace. If they had not entered the Great Kuan Sword Residence and received nurturing, they would not have been able to achieve such accomplishments at their age even if they were extremely talented. They would not have been able to rapidly increase their strength and would not have been able to obtain certain opportunities. Moreover, after they became sword heroes and became the candidates for the Great Kuan Sword Mansion to participate in the Battle of Providence, they had an inseparable connection with the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. It could also be said that from then on, if the Great Kuan Sword Mansion prospered, they would also be slightly affected. If the Great Kuan Sword Mansion declined, they would similarly be slightly affected. Perhaps it wouldn't affect him much at first, but sometimes it would become quite obvious. On the other hand, if the providence of the 10 of them flourished, the Great Kuan Sword Manor would also be affected. However, the increase or decrease of individual providence was negligible to a massive entity like the Sword Manor. No matter what, they could only fight with their full strength now. The more opponents they defeated, the more energy of karmic luck they would obtain. Let alone the top 3, just the temporary boost from the energy of karmic luck was enough to benefit them greatly. Not only did Chu Mu and the others think so, but the sword heroes of the other sword mansions also had the same thought. Furthermore, their gazes constantly swept towards the Great Kuan Sword Mansion as if they were looking at prey. In their eyes, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion that had been at the bottom for the past 60 years was the best prey. Whoever went up against the sword heroes of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was equivalent to obtaining the energy of karmic luck for free. Many people were secretly praying in their hearts that they would be able to meet the sword heroes of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. That would make things easier for them. I believe that all of you can't wait any longer. Since that's the case, I hereby announce that the decennial Battle of Providence of the 10 major sword mansions will now begin. Elder Tang of the East Sage Hall's voice spread out and reverberated throughout the entire heaven-battling sword grounds. It buzzed in everyone's ears and immediately caused them to be alert. They straightened their bodies and cleared their minds of distracting thoughts as they widened their eyes. The people of the 10 major sword mansions also looked towards the sky. Their eyes were glowing as they waited for Elder Tang's announcement. The first battle of the Battle of Providence. Elder Tang suddenly shouted with a serious expression. His eyes lit up as he looked down at the crowd, as if he could see through every single sword hero. Great Qian Sword Mansion's sky-incinerating sword hero, Lai Kongyang versus Elder Tang paused and gave the crowd some time to think about who the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, was. At the same time, it made them feel nervous. The Great Kuan Sword Mansion's raging flame sword hero, Long Lai. 2 sword heroes, please enter the arena. After Elder Tang's announcement, the crowd looked at each other. Among the 10 major sword mansions, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was the weakest and the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was the strongest. This was known to all. Wasn't it bullying the Great Kuan Sword Mansion by directly arranging the strongest sword mansion's sword hero against the weakest sword mansion? The Fengtian sword hero is actually the first to fight. Apart from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, the other 9 sword mansions had grave expressions, especially those from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. As the person involved, Long Lai's face was a little pale. Why? Because the Fengtian sword hero was extremely powerful. Previously, the book that Bailey Jianghe found had records of the Fengtian sword hero. The Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, had participated in the previous Battle of Providence and obtained the top 10. This wasn't surprising, it could only be said that his strength was not bad. Most importantly, he was already a powerful sword hero 10 years ago. After 10 years of accumulation, the current Lai Kongyang had become even more powerful. He was probably many times stronger than he was 10 years ago. It was very terrifying. Among the sword heroes, it was rare to hear of anyone who could accumulate for 10 years without breaking through. For example, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword hero had only accumulated for 7 years before he couldn't suppress it anymore and was forced to break through. In a sense, the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, had accumulated for at least 13 years since he became a sword hero. Even the Great Kuan sword hero, Mu Longqing, couldn't compare with such accumulation. It should be known that the longer a sword hero's accumulation, the more difficult it was. Once it reached the later stages, one had to continuously suppress and accumulate until the limit. Normally, a sword hero wouldn't be able to continue after 5 years and would have to break through. From 5 years onwards, the difficulty would double with each additional year. It was already very impressive if one could accumulate for 7 or 8 years. Those who could accumulate for 9 years were geniuses among the sword heroes. Sword heroes who could accumulate for 10 years were very rare. As for those who exceeded 10 years, there weren't more than 10 people in the Eastern sword domain in the past 1,000 years. The Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, had accumulated for 13 years. Even among the 10 people in the past 1,000 years, he could be ranked in the top 3. He had the title of the Great Qian Sword Mansion's sword hero, and also the Great Qian Dynasty's sword hero. It was rumored that he had once left the Eastern sword domain and went to the Central sword domain to train for several years. After returning, his strength was even more terrifying and unfathomable. He was hailed as the Great Qian Dynasty's sword hero by the Emperor of the Eastern sword domain. The Eastern sword domain's sword hero, the king among the sword heroes. This was a supreme honor. Even though many people didn't agree, and there were even some powerful sword heroes who challenged Lai Kongyang because they weren't convinced. In the end, they were defeated by Lai Kongyang's sword. It was rumored that Lai Kongyang didn't even use 50% of his strength. No matter what, the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, was a legend. The Great Qian Sword Mansion's sword hero, the Great Qian Dynasty's sword hero, the Eastern sword domain's sword hero, the king among the sword heroes. Although no one knew how powerful Lai Kongyang's true strength was, the titles above his head were enough to make many people pale in fright. The Raging Inferno sword hero, Long Lai, couldn't believe that his first opponent would be the king among the sword heroes, the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang. He almost wanted to cry. It was a bad start. You can admit defeat, Bailey Jianghe said with a frown. He didn't expect that the first battle would be against the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Sword Hero and the Eastern Sword Domain's Sword Hero, Lai Kongyang. This was simply a blow to the confidence of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Sword Heroes. Just think about it. Encountering a terrifying opponent in the first battle and being defeated easily would be a huge blow to the overall morale. It might affect the final battle later on. If the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Sword Hero could win the first battle, it would be a good start. It would also serve as a motivation for the Sword Heroes later on. At this moment, the people of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion even suspected that Elder Tang of the Eastern Sage Palace had deliberately arranged this to target the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. In theory, there was no need for him to do so. As an aloof sect, the Eastern Sage Palace shouldn't interfere with the 10 Great Sword Mansions. Perhaps this was just a coincidence. After all, there was nothing special about Elder Tang's face. Junior Brother Long, the palace master, is right. Admit defeat to avoid being injured. It would be disadvantageous for the final battle later on. Fu Yunxiao said. Long Lai's face was pale. However, he had already decided to fight even if he wasn't as good as his opponent. He only reacted after hearing Fu Yunxiao's words. That's right. Against Lai Kongyang, there was only one outcome: defeat. Once he was defeated by Lai Kongyang, he might be severely injured. It wasn't easy to recover from such injuries. Once he was arranged to fight later on, he would probably be defeated again. He might even be injured and continue to lose. If he was defeated all the way, no matter how strong his willpower was, he wouldn't be able to accept it. It would inevitably leave a psychological shadow, and he wouldn't be able to improve for the rest of his life. After understanding this point, Long Lai suddenly heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at Elder Tang and said loudly, I admit defeat. What? He actually admitted defeat before even going on stage. This Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Sword Hero is too useless. So what? The Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Sword Hero is the weakest among the 10 Great Sword Mansions. Moreover, his opponent this time is the Sword Hero King, Lai Kongyang. If he doesn't admit defeat, is he going to embarrass himself? Although that's the case, this is too, at this moment, from one of the 10 Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Sword Heroes, a 9-foot-9 long Providence Dragon rose. It rapidly rushed into Long Lai's body and rushed back out. Its length instantly broke through to a little more than 3 meters. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 460. There was a seal in the heaven-deciding sword arena. This seal was to isolate the center of the arena and prevent the aftermath of the battle from affecting or harming the spectators. However, the seal was unable to isolate sound. Moreover, although the seats of the 10 Great Sword Manors were relatively close to the sword battle arena in the middle, they were still considered an extension of the spectator seat. However, the name of the seats was different. They were called the contestant seat. The first battle was between the Great Qian Sword Mansion's Inferno Sword Hero and the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Inferno Sword Hero. Before the battle even began, the Inferno Sword Hero had already admitted defeat. This caused a commotion among the millions of spectators. The contents of the discussions were mostly bad for the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Burning Sky Sword Hero, Raging Inferno Sword Hero. These 2 titles are enough to let people know who is better. What's the point of competing? This voice entered the ears of everyone in the Great Kuan Sword Mansion without any concealment. Long Lai's expression immediately changed. He raised his head and looked towards the source of the voice. His eyes flickered as he tried to find the person who had spoken. Unfortunately, there were millions of viewers. There were too many people. Even if they knew the direction, they couldn't determine who it was. In my opinion, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword heroes do not live up to their reputation. After Long Lai retracted his gaze, another voice sounded. This time around, the entire Great Kuan Sword Mansion was involved. However, they were helpless. Could it be that they had to kill everyone here? Putting aside the fact that he didn't have the strength to do so, with so many people around him, even if he were to just stand there and let him kill them, who knew how long it would take? Don't be affected by the outside world. Bailey Jiang, he shouted coldly. Use your strength to prove it and make them shut their mouths. Chen Buer, who rarely spoke as well. His tone was calm and contained a trace of seriousness. Yes. Other than Chu Mu, the other 9 sword heroes all solemnly responded. Only Chu Mu, from the beginning, had an indifferent expression. His attitude of not changing even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him made Bailey Jiang he and the others think highly of him. The second battle of the Battle of Providence. Wind Sword Hero Tang Yuan of Gale Sword Mansion versus Jade Wave Sword Hero Yang Zhe of Yen Sword Mansion, Elder Tang announced. 2 figures flew out from 2 different camps of the Sword Mansion. They passed through the seal and landed on the arena. The seal would only be effective when it was attacked by a sufficiently powerful force. Let the battle begin. Elder Tang shouted from the sky. The Sweeping Wind Sword Hero and the Blue Wave Sword Hero both drew their swords and engaged in an intense battle. The Sweeping Wind Sword Hero was proficient in the wind element, while the Blue Wave Sword Hero was proficient in the water element. The clash of green and blue was very exciting. The millions of spectators watched with their eyes wide open and held their breath. They couldn't wait to imprint the battle between these 2 sword heroes in their minds so that they could savor it all the time. Chu Mu and the others were also watching the battle between the 2 sword masters on the arena with wide eyes, especially Chu Mu. As he watched, he put himself in the shoes of the 2 sword masters, quickly switching between opponents, how to deal with the opponent's moves, how to counterattack, and so on. Among those present, only Chu Mu could do this. That was because his spiritual strength was incomparably powerful, 10 times stronger than others. That was why he could multitask. Especially with the support of the power of destiny, the effect was even more obvious. The benefits were obvious. Chu Mu could convert everything he watched into his own in an extremely short amount of time. In other words, Chu Mu could quickly convert everything he saw into his own ability while watching, slowly strengthening himself. This ability was undoubtedly very terrifying. Even the sword of Gojoseon would be jealous. Although the others were also watching attentively, they didn't gain much. They could only temporarily remember a small portion of what they felt was useful. When they had time, they could slowly reflect on it and convert it. The techniques of the sword, the application of the sword force, the adaptability, the timing of the sword skills, and so on. Swordsmen who could become sword masters were all people with outstanding talent. This didn't only refer to talent in cultivation or swordsmanship. It also included talent in battle and other aspects. Not a single one could be lacking. No matter how weak a sword hero was, he still had his merit. In the blink of an eye, the 2 sword masters on the battle arena had been fighting for 15 minutes. There was still no winner. The sword chi they slashed out was incomparably pure and condensed. When it collided with the seal, it instantly shattered and turned into countless specks of light. However, the seal only trembled slightly. There were only extremely fine ripples that disappeared in less than a breath's time. Junior Chu, who do you think will win? Jiang Liken suddenly asked in a low voice. Blue Wave Sword Master. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu answered. Why? The others all looked over, including Chen Buer. Intuition, Chu Mu answered. For a moment, everyone didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just then, the Wind Sword Master was hit by the Blue Wave Sword Master's sword skill. He flew backwards and hit the seal. With a groan, blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He was already injured. You win, the Wind Sword Master said with a dark expression. He still had the strength to fight, but because he was injured, he could only use 80% of his strength. There was no way he could defeat his opponent. He might as well heal himself and wait for the next battle. Blue Peach Sword Master Yang Zhe wins. Elder Tang announced. The Blue Wave Sword Master heaved a sigh of relief. This battle wasn't easy. A 9 feet 9 fate dragon flew out from his body and rushed towards the Wind Sword Master. When it returned, it was already more than 10 feet long. The Wind Sword Master didn't move and allowed 10% of his fate power to be devoured. He knew that he couldn't avoid it no matter what. He could only wait for the next battle to replenish it. As long as I meet the people from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, I can definitely replenish it or even become stronger, the Wind Sword Master thought. His gloomy eyes swept across the 10 sword masters from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion as if he was looking at prey. This gaze made the sword masters from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion very unhappy. The third battle of the Battle of Providence. The Phantom Sword Master from the Great Minister Sword Mansion, Yun Su, versus the Violent Thunder Sword Mansion, Shin Tushing. Elder Tang's voice sounded again. Another 2 figures leaped up. One left afterimages while the other was surrounded by violent lightning. They both passed through the seal and landed on the battle arena, facing each other from afar. The 2 of them mocked each other. The battle begins. With Elder Tang's shout, the battle began. At this level of battle, there was almost no probing. Or rather, their initial attacks were just probing. However, to the others, such probing was no different from a killing move. Chu Mu once again put himself in the shoes of the Phantom Sword Master. He imagined himself as the opponent of the Phantom Sword Master. After a while, he became the opponent of the Violent Thunder Sword Master. After that, he became the opponent of the 2 of them, fighting 1 against 2. This kind of fantasy was almost realistic. Even with Chu Mu's powerful soul spirit, he had to be fully focused. Moreover, the consumption was not small. Therefore, after every battle, Chu Mu would seize the time to recover. In the end, the Phantom Sword Master injured the Violent Thunder Sword Master and won. The Phantom Sword Master's fate dragon increased by a little more than 10 feet. The fourth battle of the Battle of Providence was between the Black Eagle Sword Mansion and the Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion. The fifth battle was between the Bright Moon Sword Mansion and the Great Sun Sword Mansion. With this, the first round of the Battle of Providence was completed. Elder Tang announced that there would be a 15-minute break. During this 15-minute break, Chu Mu closed his eyes to rest. In fact, he was meditating with all his might, using this method to recover the mental energy that he had expended. The other sword heroes were also pondering over the 5 battles, trying their best to convert and absorb. 15 minutes was actually very short. However, it was enough for the audience to wake up from the 5 consecutive exciting battles. They adjusted their mentality and welcomed the next exciting battles. Next, we will begin the second round of the Battle of Providence. Elder Tang was still floating in midair. To a sword artist with his cultivation, it was nothing much to stay in the air for a long period of time. The sixth battle. Great Qian Sword Mansion's Aurora Sword Hero, Fang Wuji against. Elder Tang announced. His gaze once again landed on the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's side. Instantly, the hearts of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's people thumped. They had a bad feeling. Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Miaoyin Sword Hero, Yu Miao Miao. How can this be? Bailey Jiang He's countenance changed. To be honest, although the people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion were arrogant, their 10 sword heroes were all very strong. In terms of accumulation, even the weakest of them had at least 5 years of experience. On the other hand, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's side had only accumulated for slightly more than 5 years, less than 6 years. Even if the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword hero with the deepest accumulation were to face off against the Great Qian Sword Mansion's sword hero with the weakest accumulation, it was still unknown whether the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword hero could emerge victorious. Even if the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword hero could emerge victorious, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Of course, age was not the only criterion to judge one's accumulation. However, it was the most commonly used criterion. According to the book, the Aurora Sword hero, Fang Wuji, had accumulated for 6 years, while Yu Miaomiao had only accumulated for 4 years. The possibility of her being defeated was very high. I won't be defeated so easily. Yu Miaomiao stood up, her beautiful eyes gleaming with incomparable determination. To think that you're not admitting defeat. This is really beyond my expectations. On the arena, Fang Wuji smiled lightly, appearing frivolous. It's still not clear who will win or lose, Yu Miaomiao said expressionlessly. She understood that the other party was intentionally provoking her to disturb her mental state. That was why she would not be affected so easily. Since that is the case, then I'll have some fun. Fang Wuji continued to smile frivolously. Fang Wuji comprehended the state of light, and his speed was unparalleled. Yu Miaomiao comprehended the state of sound. These two states were about the same level, each having their own specialties. A beam of white light flashed on the arena. It was Fang Wuji. He was too fast, so Yu Miaomiao could not catch him. Her counterattack was limited. In the end, Yu Miaomiao was defeated. Blood leaked out from the corner of her lips. She had no choice but to admit defeat. 10% of her luck was devoured. First, it was Long Lai who admitted defeat. Then, Yu Miaomiao was easily defeated. To the great Kuan Sword Mansion, this was a great blow. This was especially so for the discussions in the spectator stands, which made them feel exceptionally frustrated. The battles continued. After the second round ended, the third round started after 15 minutes of rest. Elder Tang still arranged for the Great Qian Sword Mansion to fight against the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Without a doubt, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion lost again. The sword hero that went up was even more injured. In the fourth and fifth rounds, the other sword manners won and lost. Furthermore, they changed their opponent. Only the Great Kuan Sword Mansion kept fighting against the Great Qian Sword Mansion, losing 5 rounds in a row. Anyone could tell that there was something fishy going on. It seemed like the Eastern Sage Hall's Elder Tang did this intentionally. Losing 5 rounds in a row was a great blow. Furthermore, the discussions in the spectator stands made the blow even greater. In any case, the current situation was very unfavorable for the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Their morale was very low. The 6th round started. The Great Qian Sword Mansion's Strong Wind Sword Hero, Yao Xiang, versus the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Jin Tian Sword Hero, Chu Mu. This match is up to you. Bailey Jianghe's face was a bit hazy as he solemnly instructed. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 461. This match was the one that the Great Kuan Sword Mansion had the highest chance of winning. Chu Mu was the strongest among the 10 sword heroes of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Years of experience didn't apply to him. The Gale Sword Hero was the one with the least years of experience among the 10 sword heroes of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. According to the records, there wasn't anything special about him. The strongest sword hero of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion against the weakest sword hero of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. This was the best opportunity to counterattack. Only by winning this match could they temporarily reverse the situation and stimulate the low morale of the crowd. Don't hold back. Winning beautifully is the most important thing. Chen Bu-er's voice sounded. Indeed, if Chu Mu won after a tough battle, the effect on the morale of the crowd wouldn't be obvious. If he won cleanly and beautifully, the effect would be very obvious. Hearing Chen Bu-er's words, the gloomy eyes of the other 9 sword heroes lit up. They looked at Chu Mu with hope. Although they didn't say anything, Chu Mu could see the anticipation and hope in their eyes. Nodding his head, Chu Mu didn't say anything. He wanted to use practical actions to reverse the low morale of the crowd. With a leap, he leaped into the air like a goshawk. Chu Mu felt as though he had passed through something and landed on the arena. Immediately after, there was a flash before his eyes and a gust of wind blew. Yao Xiang's figure appeared 100 meters away. He was staring at Chu Mu with a cold smile. Everyone from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion clenched their fists. They were very nervous. Even Chen Buer was the same. It was just that one couldn't tell from their appearance. This damned Elder Tang! Bailey Jianghe cursed in his heart. The 6 matches in a row were between the Great Kuan Sword Mansion and the Great Qian Sword Mansion. It was hard not to think about such an arrangement. It seemed as though they were deliberately targeting the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. "Let the battle begin," Elder Tang announced. Looking at the 2 people below, he already had a conclusion in his heart. In his opinion, this so-called Zhentian sword hero would definitely lose, and it would be a very ugly loss. After all, there was a clear difference between 3 years of accumulation and 5 years of accumulation. Especially the 3 years between 2 to 5 years of accumulation after every sword artist became a sword hero. It was the period of time where one's strength would grow the fastest. Back then, you defeated my younger brother, Yao Yi. Now, it's my turn to defeat you. Yao Xiang pointed his cyan sword at Chu Mu, a cool breeze swirling around him. Chu Mu suddenly realized that this person was Yao Yi's elder brother. So what? He was just an opponent that he had to defeat. Arrogant. I'll beat you until you can't be arrogant anymore. I'll shatter that little bit of pride of yours. Yao Xiang's voice was like a cold wind blowing. I'm glad that you have such thoughts. Originally, I wanted to exchange a few more moves with you. Unfortunately, in order to reinvigorate my senior brothers, I can only defeat you with a single strike. Compared to Yao Xiang's overbearing attitude, Chu Mu appeared to be very calm. Defeat me with a single strike. Yao Xiang's mouth instantly opened wide and his eyes widened. His face was filled with disbelief, as though he was hearing things. Soon after, he laughed instead of getting angry. Ha 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 ha! Defeat me with a single strike. This is the funniest thing I've ever heard since I was born. It's probably the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. His loud laughter spread through the seal and landed in the ears of every sword artist. Immediately, the 1,000,000 spectators were stunned. Then, as though they had heard the funniest joke in the world, they couldn't help but laugh out loud. The information of the 100 sword heroes was compiled into a book. Almost everyone in the 1,000,000 spectators had a book. Of course, they only knew that Chu Mu had become a sword hero 3 years ago. They didn't know that Chu Mu's strength was the best among the 10 great sword heroes of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Such a secret had long been forbidden by the Sword Mansion. For the sake of the Sword Mansion's glory, the Sword Mansion's students pretended that they didn't know about this matter. Therefore, Chu Mu was now treated as an arrogant and ignorant person. The other 9 Sword Mansion swordsmen were stunned before they laughed. They all felt that this disciple of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was too arrogant and ignorant. The Great Kuan Sword Mansion has really declined. Elder Tang, who was in the sky, shook his head and sighed softly. Only he could hear it. Since that's the case, why did you ask me to make such arrangements? The eyes of the people from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, especially Bailey Jianghe and the 9 sword heroes, lit up. After a year of interaction, they knew that Chu Mu wasn't an arrogant and frivolous person. Could it be that Chu Mu can really defeat his opponent with a single strike? This thought popped up in their minds at the same time, and they couldn't suppress their excitement. If Chu Mu could really defeat his opponent with a single strike, it would definitely be a great motivation for the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Their low morale would instantly soar. Yao Xiang's laughter suddenly stopped. He turned into a gust of wind and charged at Chu Mu. His eyes, which were flickering with a green glow, left 2 green tails in the air because his body moved so quickly. Watch how I defeat you with 3 strikes. Yao Xiang shouted as he charged over and thrust out his sword. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As Yao Xiang's wrist shook, 30% of the spiritual qi in the air quickly gathered. The green supreme grade sword swept out with extremely condensed wind blades. The edges were as sharp as the edge of a supreme grade sword. Hundreds of densely packed wind blades shot at Chu Mu like a swarm of locusts. Sword hero sword technique. Tempest 100 blades strike. Once struck, the protective sword chi would be easily torn apart. Even superior grade armor wouldn't be able to block it and would immediately be severely injured. Furthermore, the Tempest 100 blades strike was extremely fast and difficult to dodge. In the blink of an eye, it crossed dozens of meters and arrived 10 meters away from Chu Mu. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open. The people of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion wanted to see how Chu Mu would counterattack, while the others wanted to see how miserable Chu Mu would be after being struck. They felt that Chu Mu was just boasting, so once Chu Mu was struck and defeated, they would feel good in their hearts. The monster-slaying sword was unsheathed and slashed from top to bottom. 40% of the spiritual chi in the air quickly gathered. The Tianwang sword chi poured into the monster-slaying sword, and the tearing concept spread out. A dark gold color covered the monster-slaying sword. The sword's aura was extremely powerful and the rock-shaking energy was activated. Every action was completed in an instant. Everyone only saw Chu Mu slash out. Most people didn't even see how he pulled out the sword. They only saw a dark gold crescent moon that was more than 10 meters long cut through the sky. A dense buzzing sound that was so faint that it was almost inaudible sounded. The incomparably resplendent dark golden waning moon flew forward as if it was cutting through the sky. Wherever it passed, a vacuum was formed. A faint golden flame tail dragged behind it, like the tail of a meteor. Everyone's eyes were attracted by this sword. They were like iron shavings attracted by a magnet. They couldn't move or blink, and even their minds seemed to be attracted. It was impossible to describe the brilliance that erupted from this sword. There were no words to describe the beauty of this sword. It was as if a god had slashed down, destroying everything in its path. Hundreds of extremely sharp wind blades collapsed in the blink of an eye, turning into a gust of green wind that followed behind the dark golden crescent moon like guards. Sword hero sword skill. Rock-shaking sword wave. The people of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion were all excited. Impossible! Yao Xiang's expression changed drastically. He felt his vision darken as if night had fallen. Immediately after, the dark gold crescent moon tore through the darkness and slashed at him. He couldn't dodge in time. He could only mobilize 30% of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to form a defense and hold his sword in front of his chest. The dark gold crescent moon instantly tore through 30% of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth and heavily bombarded Yao Xiang's sword. The powerful force directly tore through Yao Xiang's protective sword chi. The terrifying rock-shaking force made Yao Xiang unable to hold onto his sword and flew to the side. His palm was twisted and injured. Pung! The robe on Yao Xiang's body exploded as the upper rank armor released a burst of intense light, which dissipated under the dark golden waning moon. A cracking sound was heard as the upper rank armor shattered. Yao Xiang's entire body flew out like a cannonball, heavily crashing into the seal. The huge rebound force bounced his body back, his head swinging forward as his mouth involuntarily opened wide. A mouthful of blood spurted out like an arrow. With another bang, Yao Xiang's entire body was sprawled on the ground of the arena. His head was bleeding and the arena shook. At the same time, everyone's heart trembled. They felt as if they had been smashed by a hammer, and they almost suffocated. The entire heaven-battling arena fell into a strange dead silence. Even breathing seemed to have stopped. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. A dragon of providence flew out from Chu Mu's body and rushed into Yao Xiang's body. It was more than 3 meters long. After 30 breaths, Yao Xiang, who woke up from his coma, struggled with difficulty and let out a groan. Quickly bring him down. The Great Qian Sword Mansion's mansion master was the first to react. He quickly shouted. Immediately, an elder rushed out and landed on the arena. He carried Yao Xiang and grabbed at the void. Yao Xiang's supreme grade sword fell into his hand. The elder glared at Chu Mu fiercely and snorted. His voice was like a sword radiance that pierced into Chu Mu's ears. Chu Mu frowned slightly. This snort had shaken his mind, his spiritual world, and his chi and blood. Fortunately, his soul power was very strong. It was only shaken, and he returned to normal after a few breaths. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He wanted to kill this Origin Realm elder of the Great Qian Sword Mansion. In a flash, the elder of the Great Qian Sword Mansion brought Yao Xiang and his sword away from the arena and returned to the Great Qian Sword Mansion's camp. He quickly gave Yao Xiang elixirs to heal his internal and external injuries. One had to admit that Yao Xiang looked very miserable at this moment. Although he had woken up, he was powerless and was at the mercy of others. Heaven-shaking sword hero Chu Mu wins. Elder Tang recovered from his shock and loudly announced. He only felt that his mind was a bit absent-minded. The scene in front of him had overturned the conclusion in his heart, and he found it hard to accept. He won. Bailey Jiang murmured. He won. Chu Mu really won. He defeated him with one sword. He really defeated him with one sword. Ha 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 ha. We can hold our heads high. We can hold our heads high. At this moment, the 9 sword heroes were cheering like children. They had been too depressed before. The people of the Great Koan Sword Mansion were overjoyed and extremely excited. Their hearts were beating several times faster, and their faces were flushed. Even Chern Bu-er's hands were trembling from the excitement in his heart. What a soul-stirring sword! It's not impossible to fight against Huang Fu Huang Tian in 10 years, he said softly in his heart. He couldn't help but feel a surge of battle intent. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 462. The first day of the Battle of Providence had ended, but the discussions were unprecedentedly heated because of Chu Mu's battle and Chu Mu's sword. Thrilling. Stunning beyond compare. Not only did the millions of spectators not dare to underestimate Chu Mu, but the other members of the 9 Supreme Sword Residences didn't dare to underestimate Chu Mu either. They knew that it wasn't luck at all. It was true strength. Kong Yang, what do you think of that sword? The palace master of the Great Qian Sword Residence asked. Not bad. That's all. Lai Kong Yang said faintly. That's true. The Great Qian Sword Residence's King Residence Palace Master smiled and secretly thought that he had asked the wrong person. Lai Kong Yang was the Sword Hero King of Eastern Sword Region. That Great Koan Sword Residence's Chu Mu's strength was not bad, but compared to Lai Kong Yang, the difference was like heaven and earth. He believed that Lai Kong Yang had used his full strength to defeat Yao Xiang. As for the unlucky Yao Xiang, he was severely injured by Chu Mu's sword and had vomited blood and fainted. He was brought back and treated with elixirs. Unfortunately, Chu Mu's sword was driven by the Infinite Desolation Sword Qi. The corrosive characteristics of the Infinite Desolation Sword Qi constantly corroded Yao Xiang's body. It would take a lot of time to get rid of the corrosive characteristics of the Infinite Desolation Sword Qi. Simply put, Yao Xiang would be crippled in a short period of time. Even if he went on stage, he wouldn't be able to use 50% of his strength. Elder Tang, please arrange for you to fight with Chu Mu for tomorrow's battle. The mansion master of the Great Qian Dynasty's Sword Mansion said with a smile. You know what to do. Lai Kong Yang smiled and said, Don't worry. I guarantee that he will suffer 10 times more than Junior Brother Yao for what he did to Junior Brother Yao. The Great Koan Sword Residence is really unexpected this time to have such a powerful sword hero. The Palace Master of the Hidden Dragon Sword Residence, which was ranked second among the 10 Supreme Sword Residences, smiled and looked at a young man beside him. Lu Yuan, what do you think of his sword? It's just so. Lu Yuan replied expressionlessly, I only have one opponent. I don't care about the others. The hidden dragon sword mansion's mansion master smiled. He knew that the opponent Lu Yuan was talking about was the sword hero king, Lai Kongyang. After the first day's battle ended, the Great Kuan sword residents returned to the Great Kuan Garden with a record of 1 win and 9 losses. The Battle of Providence was not something that could be completed in a day or two. Even though they had lost 9 rounds, Chu Mu's victory made them feel especially proud and refreshed. Junior brother Chu's sword is really too amazing. Long Lai laughed loudly. I think they might think that this is junior brother Chu's full strength, Jiang Liken said with a smile. Junior brother Chu, let's shock them again in tomorrow's battle. Let them see your prowess. Fu Yunxiao also laughed. Because Chu Mu's rise was too sudden, it overturned the conclusion in everyone's heart, making them feel unprepared. Senior brothers, don't be too optimistic. Yu Miao Miao's face flashed with a hint of worry. With one look, I can tell that Elder Tang of the East Sage Hall is helping the Great Kuan Sword Mansion to go against us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have lost 9 rounds. If not for junior brother Chu's strength, I'm afraid that we would have lost 10 rounds in a row today and wouldn't have the face to continue participating in the next battle. When everyone heard Yu Miao Miao's words, they were stunned and their faces turned gloomy. It was too obvious. The other sword manners had adjusted their opponents, but the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's opponent had always been the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Even a fool could tell that there was something fishy going on. However, the East Sage Hall was high and mighty. The status of the East Sage Hall's elders was not inferior to the mansion masters of the 10 sword manors. Their strength was even more unfathomable. Regardless of status or strength, they couldn't question an elder of the East Sage Hall. If that's the case, tomorrow's battle. Everyone's faces suddenly turned pale. Their eyes were filled with worry as they looked at Chu Mu. Suddenly, they hated the feeling of exhilaration that they had just experienced. This was because they had all thought of the same situation. In tomorrow's battle, there was an 80 to 90% chance that the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Blazing Sky sword hero, Lai Kongyang, would be pitted against Chu Mu. The Blazing Sky sword hero, Lai Kongyang. Even without that book, this name was still very well known. He was the #1 sword hero in the Eastern Sword domain, the king of sword heroes. They didn't know how powerful Lai Kongyang was. They only knew that until now, those powerful sword heroes who didn't accept the title of king of sword heroes couldn't even take 3 of his sword strikes. It was rumored that no one had ever seen Lai Kongyang unleash his full strength because they weren't qualified. The words Blazing Sky sword hero, Lai Kongyang, were like a piece of heaven that suppressed all the sword heroes in the Eastern Sword domain. They could only look up at him and feel despair under such suppression. Even if there was a day when Lai Kongyang couldn't suppress his accumulation and had to break through, such a shadow would still follow them. Was Chu Mu powerful? Powerful. At least among the students of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, Chu Mu was the most powerful. Furthermore, he was only 23 years old this year. He became a sword hero at the age of 20 and was the only one in the Great Kuan dynasty in 1,000 years. Even in the entire Eastern Sword domain, he could be ranked in the top 10. At the age of 22, he could suppress a sword hero who had accumulated for 5 years. Now, at the age of 23, he could execute a soul-stirring sword strike and severely injure a sword hero who had accumulated for almost 6 years. They all believed that if Chu Mu was given enough time, as long as Chu Mu was given a few more years, he might be able to compete with Lai Kongyang for the title of King of Sword Heroes in the Eastern Sword domain. However, if Chu Mu were to face off against Lai Kongyang tomorrow, Lai Kongyang's incomparably powerful strength would cause others to feel despair. Once Chu Mu was defeated by Lai Kongyang's sword, it might be a huge blow to Chu Mu. It would leave a shadow in his heart and hinder Chu Mu's progress in the future. To a certain extent, it was equivalent to stifling him. Junior brother Chu, I know that you are proud and unyielding, but in tomorrow's battle, Once you face off against Lai Kongyang, you must immediately admit defeat no matter what. Do not give Lai Kongyang a chance to attack. Jiang Liken said to Chu Mu with an extremely serious expression. The other sword heroes also had solemn expressions. That's right, junior brother Chu. With your talent, you might not necessarily be inferior to Lai Kongyang in the future. What you lack is time. If you had become a sword hero 10 years ago, you might not necessarily be unable to fight Lai Kongyang now. Fu Yunxiao added, however, you have only been a sword hero for 3 years now. This is the time when a sword hero's strength will increase by leaps and bounds. Senior brothers, don't worry. I know what I am doing, Chu Mu smiled and said. Compared to the worries in their hearts, Chu Mu was actually very calm. Firstly, Chu Mu didn't know much about Lai Kongyang. He had only been a sword hero for a short period of time. What kind of person Lai Kongyang was, he only knew about it yesterday. Secondly, it was because of his confidence. The 2 years of seclusion in the Eastern Sage sub-palace was mainly to strengthen his foundation, but it also had an obvious effect on his strength. After a year of digesting and absorbing, Chu Mu's strength was still increasing rapidly. Until now, it had only slowed down slightly. All of this was because of his powerful soul and monstrous perception that surpassed other sword artists. The increase was greater than others, and the duration was longer than others. This was his incomparable advantage. A sword hero's strength was determined by their years of accumulation. In fact, Chu Mu's 1 year of accumulation might be equivalent to several years of accumulation for other sword heroes. Therefore, even Chu Mu himself wasn't clear about how strong he was. Because until now, he had yet to meet an opponent who could make him use his full strength. This was because Chu Mu still couldn't fight against an Origin Realm sword artist, even if he used his full strength. Therefore, they couldn't be called opponents. Only sword heroes could be called opponents. After looking at the information of the 100 sword heroes in the book, Chu Mu had a feeling that of these sword heroes, if there were no accidents, only Lai Kongyang could be his opponent. As for the 2 sword heroes who were ranked 2nd and 3rd, if they could force Chu Mu to use his full strength, even Chu Mu himself couldn't be sure. Just the information in the book was quite detailed, but there were some secret things that weren't recorded at all. Perhaps they didn't know, or perhaps they didn't allow it. If Chu Mu was hiding something, then the others might be hiding something as well. Originally, Chu Mu's plan was to compete with Lai Kongyang in the final battle, the battle at the pinnacle. But if tomorrow's battle was really arranged to be between him and Lai Kongyang, then it wasn't impossible. They would have to fight sooner or later. Junior brother. Fu Yunxiao was anxious and immediately said, as if he wanted Chu Mu to agree right now. Alright, since junior brother Chu said that he knows what he's doing, then he knows what he's doing. Jiang Liken suppressed Fu Yunxiao's words and said softly, we should believe in junior brother Chu. Everyone also came to their senses and secretly thought that they were too worried. Chu Mu wasn't someone who would act recklessly. Senior brothers, take advantage of the great fortune to comprehend and do your best to increase your strength. Chu Mu said with a smile and stood up to leave. Junior brother is right. Now is the best opportunity for us to raise our strength. Work hard and comprehend. No matter what, we cannot lose again. Long Lai stretched out his hand and clenched his fist tightly as he spoke in a powerful and resonating voice. In the blink of an eye, everyone left. They all returned to their rooms to reflect on what they had learned today, converting and absorbing it. Chu Mu was different. He had a strong soul and monstrous comprehension ability. Furthermore, he had the support of a vast amount of luck. Chu Mu had converted and absorbed all 50 battles that happened today, drawing inferences from them. In terms of who gained the most from watching such battles, Chu Mu was undoubtedly the first. Even Lai Kongyang couldn't compare to him. Hence, Chu Mu was now using the luck to comprehend the sword intent. One could say that the sword intent was one of Chu Mu's trump cards. He didn't know when he would have to reveal this trump card. Of course, the slower, the better. At the same time, Bailey Jiang he left the Great Kuan Garden with a heavy heart. For the sake of tomorrow's battle, the Great Kuan Sword residents wouldn't repeat today's mistakes. He had to make an appearance, even if he had to pay a price. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 463. The night passed silently as Chu Mu and the others spent their time comprehending. Such a huge blessing might only happen once in a lifetime, and it wouldn't last long either. They had to make full use of every minute and second. Dawn arrived. When the first ray of sunlight shone down from the sky, millions of spectators returned to the heavenly deciding sword arena. The 50 battles yesterday were all very exciting, but the most exciting one was Chu Mu's battle. This was the common understanding of the spectators because that sword had overturned the conclusion in their hearts. Their hearts were yearning to see that sword again. It was soul-stirring and peerless. The people of the 10 great sword palaces had also arrived at the competition area, but the battle had yet to start because Elder Tang, the host of the battle, had yet to appear. This situation made everyone feel strange. The great Qian Sword Palace's palace lord had a trace of astonishment in his eyes, while Bailey Jiang had a trace of a smile in his eyes. All of this seemed to have nothing to do with Chu Mu. He closed his eyes to rest, but in fact, he was in the midst of comprehending. Sword intent realm. Under the blessing of the powerful blessing, he could feel his improvement at all times. Time passed by slowly. After an hour, a figure flew over and appeared above the arena. He was wearing a black robe and had a solemn expression. It was actually not Elder Tang from yesterday. Elder Tang has some urgent matters to attend to. I'll be presiding over the upcoming battle for karmic luck. You can call me Elder Long, the black-robed old man said emotionlessly. His voice was stiff and somewhat unreasonable. The great Qian Sword Palace's palace lord was startled, while Bailey Jiang had a look of relief. What's going on? Why did they change the referee midway? A swordsman was puzzled and muttered softly. In my opinion, that Elder Tang from yesterday was on the side of the Great Qian Sword Palace. He had the intention to help the Great Qian Sword Palace go against the Great Kuan Sword Palace. Therefore, he was banned from continuing to host the battle. A shrewd swordsman guessed. Didn't they say that the East Sage Hall was detached from worldly affairs and wouldn't get involved in the disputes of the Eastern Sword Domain? Someone was puzzled. It's true that the Eastern Sage Hall is a transcendent being. But not everyone from the Eastern Sage Hall is able to do so. This short conversation had explained most of the true situation. They've changed the referee, that's great. This way, Chu Mu might not have to face Lai Kongyang. The Great Kuan Sword Mansion's sword heroes were the happiest. Elder Long didn't care about the discussions of the surrounding people. A book appeared in his hand, and he flipped open the book to take a look. After that, he swept his gaze towards the 10 great sword mansions. The first battle. Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion's Goodwater Sword Hero, Li Ruoshui, versus Bright Moon Sword Mansion's Starry Sword Hero, Li Xinghan. Let the battle begin. The two sword masters immediately engaged in an intense battle. Virtuous as water, the sky full of stars. 15 minutes later, Li Ruoshui had defeated the astral swordsman in one move, and his fate dragon had increased by quite a bit. The battles continued one after another. No one could guess which sword mansion's sword grandmaster would fight against which sword mansion's sword grandmaster in the next battle. It was obvious that the 100 sword grandmasters from the 10 great sword mansions had been disrupted and rearranged. The battles continued one after another. There were even battles between the same sword mansion's sword grandmasters. The 8th battle. Great Wind Sword Mansion's Flashing Wind Sword Mansion's Tang Yuan vs. Great Kuan Sword Mansion's Zhen Tian Sword Mansion's Chu Mu. It's Zhen Tian Sword Mansion's turn. I wonder if he'll be able to unleash that stunning sword strike like last time. That's great. Junior brother Chu doesn't have to face Lai Kongyang. Chu Mu and Tang Yuan both leaped onto the battle arena, attracting the attention of the crowd. Your sword move yesterday was very spectacular. However, I will defeat you, Tang Yuan said. Please. Chu Mu was even simpler. The battle began. Tang Yuan's comprehension of the wind mentality had already reached perfection. The moment he drew his sword, he displayed a powerful sword skill. Under the long sword, a green wind gathered. A whistling sound resounded in the surroundings. Tang Yuan's figure disappeared, transforming into a green wind that flew towards Chu Mu. Flashing Wind Sword Mansion's ultimate skill, Wind Transformation. Many powerful enemies had died under his ultimate sword skill. Now, he displayed it immediately because he valued Chu Mu. Yesterday, Chu Mu's sword move had shocked him. All right, Chu Mu said softly. He unsheathed the monster-slaying sword, raised it, and slashed down again. The whole process took less than 1/100th of a second. The 10-meter dark golden waning moon appeared again. The heaven and earth seemed to have lost its color. Only the dark golden waning moon released an incomparably bright light. Almost everyone's eyes widened. Only Ao Xingyun, Lu Yuan, and Lai Kongyang's expressions did not change. Tang Yuan's heart shook. He felt that the air in front of him was affected by some strange power. It started to vibrate, affecting his sword skill. Wind Transformation was a wind attribute sword skill. It was closely related to the airflow. If the airflow was affected, his sword skill would be affected as well. His vision darkened. A dark golden waning moon pierced through the air and filled his eyes. It completely occupied his world, making it impossible to dodge. Tang Yuan finally understood how Yao Xiang felt. With a boom, his sword skill was broken. His protective sword aura was torn apart, and the sword in his hand was shattered. His entire body flew backward, spitting out a mouthful of blood in midair. One sword move had injured Tang Yuan. He would not be able to continue fighting for a short period of time. Fortunately, Tang Yuan was slightly stronger than Yao Xiang. In addition, Chu Mu's sword move was not as powerful as yesterday's, so Tang Yuan's injuries were not as serious as Yao Xiang's. Zhen Tian Sword Mansion, Chu Mu wins. Elder Long looked at Chu Mu and announced. A Providence dragon rushed out of Chu Mu's body and charged towards Tang Yuan. It took a longer time for it to return to Chu Mu. What a stunning sword move! I saw it again. Brilliant, brilliant. The people of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion were also very happy. The final battle continued. In the blink of an eye, the 50 battles of the second day's battle for Providence ended. On the third day, the battle for Providence continued. Chu Mu's opponent was the Great Minister Sword Mansion's Phantom Sword Mansion's Yun Su. Yun Su had comprehended the shadow mentality. It was based on the variation of the cloud mentality. It was even more unpredictable. Once it was used, there would be layers of phantoms that were unpredictable and unpredictable. As if he understood how terrifying Chu Mu's sword move was, Yun Su used his shadow the moment Elder Long announced the start of the final battle. The entire arena was filled with Yun Su's phantoms. This time, Chu Mu will not be able to defeat his opponent with one sword move. Yeah, there are layers of phantoms. It is impossible to find the real body unless his sword move can cover the entire arena. No one was optimistic about Chu Mu's chances in this battle. His sword move was indeed very powerful. However, if he could not find the target, he would not be able to attack. Chu Mu glanced around. There was a dark gold swirling in his eyes like a whirlpool. Countless phantoms swam around. At this moment, they all rushed towards Chu Mu from all directions. Each of the phantoms had a sword in their hands. They were filled with killing intent. It was as if each of the phantoms had a terrifying killing power. Sword hero sword skill. 1,000 phantoms slaughter. The monster-slaying sword was unsheathed. He raised it up and slashed down. It was the same action as 2 days ago. It was another 10-meter-long dark gold crescent moon that cut through the void. It was equally shocking and stunning. However, many people were shocked. They felt that Chu Mu was attacking too fast. It looked like he was attacking randomly. This sword slashed towards the front and slightly to the left. With a boom, a human figure flew out like a cannonball. It crashed into the seal and bounced up. Countless phantoms disappeared in an instant. The Dragon of Providence rose from Chu Mu's body and flew out. When it returned, its length had increased a little. Zhen Tian's sword hero Chu Mu wins. Elder Long's eyes flashed as he announced. He won again. The people of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion were shocked. Then they were overjoyed. He actually saw through the Phantom Sword hero's sword technique. The next battle was Lai Kongyang. However, his opponent had admitted defeat before entering the arena. This was already the third time. In other words, Lai Kongyang had not entered the arena yet. All of his opponents had admitted defeat. As for Lu Yuan, who was ranked second, and Ao Xingyun, who was ranked third, they had entered the arena once. However, they had also defeated their opponents with a simple sword move. It looked like they had done it effortlessly. On the fourth day, Chu Mu's opponent was the Great Sun Sword Mansion's vast sun sword hero, Li Dongsheng. This sword hero had cultivated the fire concept, which was a mutated sun concept. His first move was his ultimate move. However, he was still defeated by Chu Mu's sword move, Stonequake Wave Sword. But now, the millions of spectators had named Chu Mu's sword move Waning Moon. 4 consecutive victories. Bailey Jianghe was full of smiles. This was the first time in 60 years that the Great Kuan Sword Mansion had won. Right now, he really hoped that Chu Mu could continue winning, even though it might be an extravagant hope. After the referee was changed to Elder Long, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was no longer targeted. The other 9 sword heroes had won and lost in the next 3 battles. Even though they lost more than they won, at least their morale wasn't low and they didn't feel despair. On the 5th day, Chu Mu's opponent was the Great Yen Sword Mansion's vast sky sword hero, Gu Changtian. Gu Changtian had been a sword hero for close to 7 years. He was very powerful and felt that he had the confidence to compete with Chu Mu. He might even be able to defeat Chu Mu. However, reality told him that it was impossible. It was still the same sword move. The 10-meter-long dark golden waning moon seemed to have materialized. With one sword move, Gu Changtian's sword technique was broken and he was sent flying. Fortunately, he was powerful and didn't suffer serious injuries. However, he still spat out a mouthful of blood. The Sky Baron's sword chi had invaded his body, and he had to use all his strength to suppress it and expel it bit by bit. So far, Chu Mu had won 5 consecutive victories. So far, among the 100 sword heroes, there were only about 20 who could maintain 5 consecutive victories. Chu Mu was one of them. Dark Horse, Big Dark Horse, Super Dark Horse, the millions of spectators were cheering because of Chu Mu. In every battle of Providence, there would definitely be a dark horse that would attract everyone's attention. This time it was Chu Mu. Moreover, he wasn't just a dark horse. In 5 battles, he had only used 5 sword moves and defeated all his opponents with one sword move. This wasn't something that could be described as a dark horse anymore. It was the title of a super dark horse. I wonder if Chu Mu can still defeat his opponents with one sword move tomorrow? I think it will be very difficult. According to the arrangement of his opponents tomorrow will definitely be stronger. Just wait and see. I have confidence in him. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 464. Chu Mu thrust his sword forward, and a finger-thick dark golden sword ray pierced through the air like an aurora. Sky-splitting sword strike. His opponent couldn't dodge at all. His protective sword chi was pierced through, and his upper-grade armor was also pierced through. he was sent flying backward. Defeated. The Dragon of Providence rushed out and returned. At this moment, the Dragon of Providence was almost 10 meters long. At this point, the Battle of Providence had been going on for 12 days. Tomorrow would be the 13th day. For the past 12 days, Chu Mu had fought a battle every day. So far, he hadn't lost a single battle. Moreover, he had defeated all his opponents with one sword strike. However, it wasn't limited to the 10-meter-long dark golden crescent moon. Sometimes it would be a finger-thick dark golden aurora. Everyone now knew that Chu Mu had more than one trick up his sleeve. Whether it was the dark golden crescent moon or the dark golden aurora, they were both extremely powerful. Once they were used, they would definitely defeat their opponent. Stone-shaking wave sword strike and sky-splitting sword strike. These were two completely different sword skills. Stone-shaking wave sword strike won with its power and covered a larger area. Sky-splitting sword strike won with its speed and covered a smaller area. However, its power was equally terrifying. As the battles progressed, Chu Mu's opponents became stronger and stronger. However, they were still not qualified for Chu Mu to use his full strength. However, the 12th opponent had accumulated for more than 9 years and was extremely powerful. Chu Mu had to use all of his sky-splitting sword strike's power to defeat his opponent with one sword strike. If the 13th opponent was even stronger, Chu Mu would have to use his sword intent if he wanted to defeat his opponent with one sword strike. However, he still planned to keep his sword intent as a trump card. He didn't want to reveal it so early. During this period, Lai Kongyang had fought once. His opponent was a sword master who had accumulated for more than 10 years. However, under Lai Kongyang's sword, this powerful sword master couldn't even block one sword strike and was sent flying backward. Lai Kongyang looked calm and relaxed. That sword strike seemed to have been done casually. It looked very ordinary and did not have the slightest trace of smoke or fire. There was also no powerful fluctuation coming from it. It looked like a child wielding a sword. However, it was that casual sword strike that defeated a powerful sword grandmaster who had accumulated experience for 10 years. In that instant, countless people narrowed their eyes as their hearts trembled. The sword hero monarch is indeed worthy of his name. In that instant, Chu Mu was tempted, and his sword intent almost shot out into the sky. Fortunately, he controlled it in time and didn't expose himself. However, Chu Mu's desire to fight Lai Kongyang grew even stronger. He wished that Elder Long would arrange for him to fight Lai Kongyang right now. He wished that he could fight Lai Kongyang to his heart's content and give it his all. Even if he lost in the end, he would not regret it. No, fighting at the top is the best, Chu Mu said to himself. Every opponent defeated was a kind of training for oneself, a kind of tempering for one's will, and a kind of improvement for one's essence, energy, and spirit. Defeating one opponent after another would allow one's essence, energy, and spirit to reach the peak. Then, one would be able to fight with the strongest opponent in the peak state. Only in this way could one explode with the strongest battle strength and perform the most exciting battle. This principle was understood by any swordsman who had cultivated to a certain level. Therefore, Elder Long had to think carefully about the arrangement of the competition. He wanted to let those who could win continuously defeat their opponents until the end of the competition. This was the way of the competition. Heaven-breaking sword Grand Master Lu Yuan, who was recognized as second place, had 8 of his opponents admit defeat. He fought in 4 battles and also used one sword strike. His sword was different from Lai Kongyang's. It was filled with a terrifying destructive aura, as if it wanted to destroy everything. With one sword strike, it crushed everything and defeated his opponents easily. Heaven-breaking sword Grand Master Ao Xingyun, who was recognized as third place, fought in 7 battles. In the other 5 battles, his opponents automatically admitted defeat and didn't even step onto the battle arena. Ao Xingyun's sword had a vast and majestic aura. Facing his sword, one would feel insignificant. Unsurprisingly, his opponents couldn't withstand one sword strike from him and were easily defeated. Chumu is really incredible. Yes, it has been 12 battles since the first battle, and he hasn't lost a single battle. This is really incredible. One sword strike. I can't believe it. He defeated all 12 battles with one sword strike. Am I dreaming? This shouldn't be. The Great Kuan Sword Mansion's providence has only been 40 feet for the past 10 years. It can't be compared with the other sword mansions. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be such a student. This was the doubt in the hearts of the other 9 sword mansions, except for Bailey Jiang-he. At the same time, it was also the doubt in the hearts of many people. Our Great Kuan Sword Mansion has been declining for 60 years. Finally, we are going to rise again. Bailey Jiang-he's face was beaming with joy. The other elders were also overjoyed. Even Chen Bu-er was excited. They believed that even if the Great Kuan Sword Mansion obtained the last place in the providence this time, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion could still rise again. This was because they had Chu Mu. If I remember correctly, there are only 4 people who have won 12 battles in a row and haven't lost a single battle. Elder Long, who was in the sky, said to himself, Sky-burning Sword Grand Master Lai Kongyang, Heaven-breaking Sword Grand Master Lu Yuan, Heaven-breaking Sword Grand Master Ao Xingyun, Zhen Tian Sword Grand Master Chu Mu. Be it Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun, they all became Sword Grand Masters 10 years ago. They have been accumulating for at least 11 years. In addition, their talents are obviously superior to other Sword Grand Masters. It is normal for them to have such strength. However, Chu Mu only became a Sword Grand Master 3 years ago. To think that he also has such strength. Even Sword Grand Masters who have been accumulating for 10 years can't compare to him. Strange, this is really strange. However, no matter if it was Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun, they all defeated their opponents very easily. They didn't use any powerful sword techniques. Only this Chu Mu repeatedly used powerful sword technique. Those 2 sword techniques should be his best sword technique. Elder Long thought again. If that's the case, even if this Chu Mu is powerful, there is a limit to how powerful he is. He is still unable to compete with Lai Kongyang and the other 2. However, if he is given enough time, his future achievements might not be inferior to the 3 of them. As an expert on the same level as the sword of Gojoseon, Elder Long's eyes were very sharp. He felt that he was right. Apart from Chu Mu, the other 9 Sword Grand Masters of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion had won and lost 12 consecutive battles. However, in terms of wins and losses, they had more wins than losses. Among them, the one who won the most battles had only won 5 battles, while the one who won the least had won 2 battles. If it wasn't for the super dark horse Chu Mu, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion would have been wiped out again. Chu Mu's rise was like a bright sun that illuminated tens of thousands of people. From the start of the battles until now, Chu Mu's strength should be more or less displayed. An elder from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion chuckled and said, however, even so, apart from the 3 of them, there probably aren't many who can match up to Chu Mu. That's right. I feel that as long as he doesn't encounter the 3 of them, Chu Mu should be able to continue winning and obtain more fate power. He might even be able to obtain more than 10 meters, said the second elder. If Chu Mu can obtain more than 10 meters of fate power in the end, together with the fate power obtained by the other 9 Sword Grandmasters, our Great Kuan Sword Mansion should be able to obtain more than 10 meters of fate power, said the third elder with a chuckle. His face was filled with joy from the bottom of his heart. What I'm most worried about now is whether Chu Mu will encounter the 3 of them. According to my estimation, the 3 of them should have comprehended sword intent, said Bailey Jianghe in a serious tone as he wiped the smile off his face. According to the normal progression, every swordsman would be able to comprehend sword force after reaching the Qi High Realm. Once they reached the complete Qi High Realm, they would be able to comprehend sword force to the small success stage. This was the most normal situation. After breaking through the Chi High realm and entering the 9th transformation realm, the sword force would continue to improve until it reached the peak of sword force. This kind of comprehension and improvement was inevitable for every swordsman. There was nothing special about it. It was just like a person's strength would naturally increase as they grew older. As for sword intent, it was something that could only be comprehended when a swordsman reached the true realm. It was above sword force and was the second step of the sword Tao. Other than naturally comprehending the sword Tao, there were some special cases where a swordsman with outstanding talent would be able to comprehend sword intent in advance. For example, some swordsmen could comprehend sword force when they were in the Qi transformation realm. Chu had comprehended sword force when he was in the sword Qi realm. Naturally, there were also some swordsmen who could comprehend sword intent before reaching the true realm. However, as the second step of the sword Tao, sword intent was 10 times more profound than sword force. It was mysterious and unpredictable, and was 100 times more difficult to comprehend than sword force. It was even more difficult to comprehend sword intent in advance. Even many talented swordsmen could only comprehend sword intent after reaching the late stage of the 9th transformation realm. Swordsmen who could comprehend sword intent in the early stage of the 9th transformation realm were all super geniuses. Those who could comprehend sword intent before reaching the 9th transformation realm were all top geniuses. There were also differences between geniuses. Normal geniuses, super geniuses, top geniuses, and top geniuses. The sword master level also belonged to the Qi Si realm. A sword master who could comprehend sword intent was 1 in 1,000. And now, the 3 people in Bailey Jianghe's group should have comprehended sword intent. They were also top geniuses. Among them, Lai Kongyang was most likely a top genius. Sword intent was something that all 11 of them had. It was just that the levels were different. They were all very clear about the power of sword intent. Even if it was just a fraction of sword intent, its power would still be at the peak of sword force. The difference between the two was like the difference between wood and steel. If Chu Mu continues to win, he will have to face one of the 3 of them sooner or later. This is an unavoidable battle. One of the elders nodded and said, "This kind of battle is also beneficial for Chu Mu. I believe that even if he loses, Chu Mu will still gain something. Who knows, maybe after experiencing sword intent, Chu Mu will be able to comprehend sword intent in a few years and increase his strength greatly." While Bailey Jianghe was talking with the 10 elders, Chu Mu and the rest of the 10 stayed in their rooms and meditated. The dragon of fate that was close to 10 feet long brought great benefits to Chu Mu. It made the effect of his comprehension more obvious and increased by several times. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation.